Blue-Nosed Witch by Margaret Embry. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Bedtime Stories by Anonymous. The Blue-Nosed Witch. Not more than 4 or 5 Halloweens ago, there was a very young witch named Blanche, who owned a broom, a black kitten called Brocket, and a bright blue nose. She belonged to a very special scurry of witches, scurry number 13, known as the best witch circles all over the country, for its beautiful flight formation. The Grand Madam, who had been leader of the club for as long as any of them could remember, flew center front. She used a vacuum cleaner instead of a broom, and when she gunned her motor it sounded as exciting as a fire siren. On the far right was Minnie Max, waving her blood-red fingernails in the dark. They really did shine like rubies. And on the far left was Blanche's best friend, Josephine, who had long yellow fluorescent teeth that gleamed like stars. In between and a little behind flew the 9 rather ordinary witches, who were only expected to follow the Grand Madam's lead and cackle with horrid glee at appropriate times. And last came Blanche, usually far, far behind. If it hadn't been for her marvelous blue nose that she could turn on and off at will, she wouldn't have been allowed into scurry number 13 at all. Blanche was always late. She had good intentions and a dependable alarm clock, but somehow she could never get started any place on time. Something always happened at the last minute to delay her. Brocket, the black kitten, would run away, or Blanche would have misplaced her broom, or she would have to finish her comic, or have just one more piece of bread and peanut butter and honey. "You see," said Minnie Max to Josephine, "Blanche is still just a baby, and she ought to be sent back to scurry number 2½. Then she'd have to ride a whisk broom, not go any higher than the tops of the poplar trees, and never stay out after midnight with the rest of the grown-ups. If she's late one more time, I'm going to report her to the Grand Madam." "I know Blanche is young and scatterbrained," agreed Josephine, "but don't bother the Grand Madam with it. I'll take care of her. I promise she'll be on time for our next flight meeting." "That's Halloween night," Minnie Max warned. "Sharp at midnight, we're taking off from Dead Man's Bluff. Afterwards, if we make a good showing against the moon, there'll be dancing and chanting and a pot of brew. You'd better see that Blanche is at least half an hour early." "I'll have her there on time," promised Josephine, "if I have to set her alarm an hour ahead." As it turned out, Josephine switched the clock ahead not 1 hour, but 2, just for good measure. That probably would have been all right, but Blanche herself, as she was getting ready for bed at noon the day of Halloween, had the same good idea. She wound her clock and set it ahead an extra hour and a half, and then just a little more in case Brocket would be hard to find. But when the alarm shrieked that evening, Brocket for once was perched demurely on the bedpost right where she belonged, her fur newly licked smooth. Blanche yawned and brushed the straw out of her hair, and rolled out of bed without her usual dilly-dallying. She washed her face and hands and polished up her blue nose. Her broom was standing neatly behind the kitchen door. Brocket hopped on eagerly without having to be coaxed. The clock said 12:15, midnight. Actually, of course, it was scarcely 8:30 when they padlocked the front door and poked the key under the mat. "It's not very dark out," said Blanche to the kitten as they soared over town. "We're probably much, much too early. Wonder if anyone is there yet." Blanche looked down below and saw a strange procession marching along the sidewalk. She dived lower for a better view. There was quite a tall witch in the lead. "Why, that looks like Josephine! But whatever is she doing with that crowd? And walking? Maybe her broom broke down. There were 3 ghosts, a pirate, a cowboy carrying a 6-shooter, and a lighted pumpkin, and a gypsy with spangled earrings. Blanche settled down on the sidewalk and fell in step beside the tall witch. At once she saw it wasn't Josephine. "Oh, excuse me," said Blanche. "I thought you were somebody I know." The tall witch turned and stared. She had a rubbery look to her face, and her hair was stringy and obviously false. Josephine was always so careful about her hair. "Hey!" shouted one of the ghosts. "Where did you get that blue light on your nose? That's really neat." The little pirate, pulling at Blanche's skirts, pleaded, "Let me see it! Let me see it!" "How does it work?" asked the cowboy, setting down his pumpkin. So Blanche showed them. She made her nose glow bright and then fade palely away, then bright again and wink off and on like a turn signal. "Gee," said the cowboy, "that's swell. I didn't see anything like that over at the dime store. Where did you buy it?" "Let me try it. Let me try it," begged the pirate, pulling again. "I didn't buy it," Blanche said primly, "and I can't take it off and let you try it. But I'll do it again for you if you'll quit yanking my dress." "Leave her alone, Butch," said the tall witch, giving the pirate a shove. Turning to Blanche, she explained, "He's my little brother. I told Mother he was too young to go out Halloweening with us, but he always has to tag along." "Oh, that's all right," Blanche said generously. "I don't mind letting him see if he wants to." She leaned down so Butch could feel her nose carefully. "Hey, if you show us how the switch works, I'll give you one of my jelly donuts," the biggest ghost offered, holding out a brown paper bag. Blanche grinned at them. "There really isn't a switch at all," she said. "It just works by concentration. I think about lighting up my nose and it begins to glow. When I want it to shine very bright, I think hard, like this." She wrinkled her forehead and squinted her eyes. The nose glowed, a bright, clear blue. "See? Simply concentration." The ghost opened his bag. "That's really super," he said. "Here, have a donut." Blanche reached in eagerly. She hadn't had a jelly donut in weeks and weeks. "Where did you get these? They're wonderful," she said, chewing happily. "Over at Smith's. They have the best stuff. Last year it was caramel apples. Come along and we'll show you which house." Blanche trailed along willingly, with Butch the pirate holding firmly to her hand. "What's your name?" he asked as they walked along. "I'm Blanche," she said. "Blanche who?" Butch's sister, the tall witch, asked. "Just Blanche." "She's Blanche Witch, that's who," Butch said reasonably. The cowboy turned around mischievously. "Which witch?" And all the ghosts joined in with great glee. "Blanche Witch, that's which witch." They climbed the steps to Smith's front porch, all chanting the refrain, "Blanche Witch, that's which witch." The gypsy rang the doorbell. A man with white hair opened the door. He gaped, "But—" "Candy or cake or your windows will break," they yelled at him. "But you kids have all been here before," he protested. "Yes, but she hasn't," they laughed, pushing Blanche in front of Mr. Smith. "Her nose turns on and off," said the pirate. "Show him." Blanche showed him obligingly. "Say, that's really something," said the man. "Come here, Mother, and see this." A lady sitting in a rocking chair got up and came over to the door. She gave a little gasp when she saw Blanche's nose. "Whatever will they think of next, these modern kids?" "Sure, that's worth 2 doughnuts at least," said Mr. Smith. "Hold your sack." "She hasn't got one," said the pirate, who had noticed right away. Mrs. Smith bustled right off to her kitchen and returned with a brown paper bag. "There now," she said, "and there are 3 jelly doughnuts, and I put in some nuts and candy corn too, because you might not have time to go to many more houses." "Thank you, ma'am," said Blanche, remembering her manners. "And please, could you tell me what time it is?" Her husband pulled out his pocket watch. "Let's see. It's just 6½ minutes after 9 o'clock." "Just after 9 o'clock?" Blanche asked, bewildered. "But I thought it was nearly midnight." The time seems to be all turned around." "It usually is on Halloween," laughed Mr. Smith. "Anything can happen tonight. Well, good night, kids, and don't soap any windows." "We won't!" they shouted, racing down the steps. "Good night, and thanks!" They stopped at the corner and looked at each other a little uncertainly, trying to decide just what to do next. "Oh!" cried Blanche in a panic. "I've lost my broom and my cat!" The tall witch stared at her. "Broom? You didn't have any broom with you." "She did too," the pirate said, "with a little black kitty sitting on the sweep part. I'll bet she left it back on Maple Street, where we stopped to look at her nose," said the gypsy. "Let's all walk back and help her find her stuff." The gypsy was right. The broom was exactly where Blanche had left it, leaning against a tree. Brocket was perched up in the branches, spitting at a yellow dog who was circling around below. Brocket refused to come down until the cowboy shooed the dog away. Then she jumped lightly down on her mistress's shoulder. Blanche shifted the kitten to a more comfortable position and looked around happily. "Well, what do we do now? There's plenty of time." "I can go to only one more place," said the short ghost, "so let's hurry." "Yes, we promised Mom we'd have him back by 9:15, said the biggest ghost. "No, it was 9:30, said the middle-sized ghost. "As long as we're out this far," the gypsy suggested, "why don't we circle back by way of Old Man Skinner's house? He has apples." The others stared at the gypsy in alarm. "He's mean," the pirate explained to Blanche. "He sure is." The cowboy nodded in agreement and set down his pumpkin. "Old Man Skinner said we stole his apples, and we didn't. The wind blew them down, but he wouldn't believe us." "That was way last year," said the gypsy. "He's maybe changed his mind by now, and everybody says he's got the best apples in town. I'd sure like one now. Let's go." She started walking. "But he hasn't changed," said the biggest ghost, holding back the other two ghosts. "He hit my dog with a rock last summer just because we were cutting across the back of his lot on our way down to the creek." "Yeah, Old Man Skinner's got a slingshot, and he's a good shot with it, too," said the middle-sized ghost. "I've seen him hit birds with it way up on telephone wires. He said they were eating his cherries." "Oh, that was last spring," said the gypsy airily. "Let's just go out and call on him." "Maybe he's lonely," said Blanche. She was thinking of those apples. "We can say trick or treat very politely, and maybe he'll treat for once." The cowboy picked up his pumpkin. "I'm game, Blanche," he said. "I'll go with you. But I can tell you right now he doesn't like kids, especially on Halloween." "But he's never seen Blanche," the tall witch said. "Maybe if he saw her wonderful nose—" "Yes," said the gypsy. "Let's go there and show him Blanche's keen blue nose. Then maybe he'll give us some apples. He's got some special good ones this year. I saw them on the trees." They formed another procession. Blanche was in the lead in this bunch. She carried her broom over her shoulder, with Brocket sitting in place on the end. The road was long and twisty. Blanche was limping a little before they got there. Her feet hurt because she wasn't used to walking so far, but she didn't let on. There was a light behind the curtains of Mr. Skinner's house, and smoke coming out of his chimney. They climbed onto the porch, giggling nervously. Miss Gypsy gave a brave 1-2-3 knock. No answer. "He must be home," whispered the tall witch. "He has a fire in his fireplace." They waited. Then all of them pounded noisily. At once the door opened a crack, and a thin, long nose, hanging over a tight little mustache, poked out at them. The cowboy raised his pumpkin, even though the candle was burned out by now. "Trick or treat?" he asked hopefully. At this the door opened wider. Two suspicious eyes glared. "Halloweening, is it? You young pests, go home, where you belong. I've no time for your nonsense." "Please, sir," said Blanche sweetly, "may we have some apples?" "Apples!" snorted the man. He scowled at Blanche a moment, then said, "Want some apples, eh? You wait right here." As soon as he had disappeared, the gypsy and the tall witch nodded, as if to say, "Didn't we tell you?" But the pirate said, "Maybe he didn't go to get apples. Maybe he went for his slingshot." "Shut up, Butch," his sister whispered. "He's gone down the cellar for apples." The gypsy shook her earrings and straightened her scarf. She wasn't so sure now. "I want to go home," said the smallest ghost in a trembling voice. "Yes," said the biggest ghost, shakily too. "We promised Mom we'd be home with him by 9:15. At that moment Mr. Skinner returned, holding a small cardboard box filled with some smallish apples. "Thanks, gee, thanks," everybody said, surprised, as he handed the apples around. The apples looked red and good in the light from the door. Everybody at about the same time bit into them. "Igfa!" they all said, spitting out. The apples were mushy and brown inside and tasted terrible. "You came here yapping for apples, didn't you?" yapped Mr. Skinner. "And I gave you apples, didn't I? What's the matter? Aren't they good enough for you? They were good enough last year when you came around and tried to steal them and broke all my tree limbs." "No, we didn't, honest, Mr. Skinner," pleaded the biggest ghost. "And who stole all my green corn and frightened my hens so they wouldn't lay? And then you come around here begging for my good apples. Well, they're all picked and sold, so you can just go home or I'll—" "Flash your nose at him," whispered the pirate, tugging at Blanche's skirts. "Scare him." Blanche winked her nose on and off, venomously, but he just snorted at her and slammed the door. "Why, he wasn't even impressed," said the gypsy in fury. "It's a perfectly frightening nose, too." "Let's soap his windows," said the middle-sized ghost. "Anybody got any soap?" "Too bad none of the kids carry it any more," sighed the tall witch. "It'd be good to have some in case of an emergency like this." "I know," Blanche whispered. "Brockett, you do something, up on that window-sill with you, and give him the you-know-what." The black cat's eyes got yellower. Softly she leaped up to the window-sill, then stretched up onto her hind legs, and scratched with her front claws up and down the screen. It sounded worse than gravel being grated on a sidewalk and squeaky chalk on a blackboard. On top of this she let out a caterwauling yowl that tore through the night, frightful enough to make people jump out of their shoes. The door flew open, and out rushed Mr. Skinner, madder than an old hornet. He had his slingshot, and he meant business. Everybody turned at once and fled. He took after them down the road, but he was too angry to aim well. The stones from his slingshot spattered at their feet, but nobody was hit. On her broom, meanwhile, Blanche spiraled around his house and up to the chimney. Smoke was curling out of it. "He's got a mighty cozy fire down there," she said to herself, "but he won't have it for long." She landed on the steep ridge of the roof and then climbed cautiously down to the big brick chimney. Leaning her broom against it, she boosted herself up so she could blow down it. Putting a hearth fire out was a trick that Minnie Max had taught her only a week or so before, and this was Blanche's first chance to try it by herself. She took a big breath of air and blew down the chimney as hard as she could, thinking just the right words as she did this and giving each blow just the right swirl. With the third blow down, the smoke slunk back. She raised her head and took another deep breath of fresh air and blew again. She blew again and again until her ears buzzed and her nose turned green. Down below, the smoke came out of the opened door in a great cloud. Mr. Skinner, thinking for sure his house was on fire, stopped chasing his visitors and ran back toward the porch. Blanche straddled her broom and gave a spring up into the air. Down she swooped over his head, buzzing him and laughing, but he was running too fast to see her. She caught up with the rest of the crowd on the corner of Maple Street, where they had gathered around Brockett. The gypsy was trembling so much her earrings were jingling like sleigh bells. The short ghost had torn his sheet, and the eye holes in his pillowcase were switched way around to the back of his head, so she couldn't see which way he was going. "Golly!" breathed the cowboy, as Blanche dismounted from her broom. "That sure beats walking." "Doesn't it have a switch either?" the tallest ghost asked. Blanche smiled. "No, it doesn't need a switch." "Not even an engine?" asked the middle ghost. Blanche thought a minute. "Well, I guess there's a sort of one." "What kind of fuel do you use?" the tallest ghost asked again. "Well," Blanche hesitated again. The cowboy said, It doesn't need fuel, dope. It works by concentration, like her nose. Yes, I guess that's it, said Blanche. I think how high I need to fly, and that's all there is to it. Let me try it, the pirate begged. I can concentrate. No, you don't, said his sister. You'd fall off and break your arm, just like you did on the tire swing. It only works for me, said Blanche. I've got to go home, said the smallest ghost in a muffled tone, trying to pull his pillowcase straight. So have we, the tall witch said, grabbing at her little brother. So long, Blanche. Here, I want to give her these first, said the pirate, wriggling out of her grasp. He dropped 3 sticky black jelly beans into Blanche's sack. When she tried to thank him, he shouted back, Oh, that's all right. I only like the orange kind. Blanche and Brocket soared over town again. The streets were nearly deserted, and most of the houses were dark. I can't understand why people always want to go to bed so early, just when things are beginning to get interesting. Blanche said to Brocket, If somebody were only still awake, we could ring some more doorbells. A little farther on, she looked down and saw a lighted house with several cars parked along the street in front of it. Look, maybe it's a party, and they might have some extra candy and nuts. She landed expertly on the front lawn, and almost before she could ring the bell, the door was opened wide. Hello, said a man. Come on in. Oh, I thought you were the Jennings. They're late, and everyone else is here. Oh, my, said a lady looking over her shoulder. It's just a little girl. And look at that cute costume. Out by yourself Halloweening, dear? Blanche nodded and winked her nose at them. Trick or treat? She asked properly. Hey, everybody come here, said the man excitedly. Look at this. She's got a neon nose. A dozen people got up out of their chairs and came over to crowd around the door. What a darling little kitty, said one lady, leaning down to pick up Brocket. Be careful, ma'am, said Blanche. She doesn't like humans very much. Listen to that, giggled the lady. She said humans, just like she was a real witch. Isn't she precious? Aren't you out pretty late by yourself? Asked another lady, looking at her watch. What will your mother say? It's almost midnight. Then Blanche remembered the flight meeting. It would be leaving sharp at midnight from Dead Man's Bluff. Excuse me, everybody, she cried out. I've got to go right now. I'm going to be late again. But they made her wait while they filled her brown paper bag with chocolate mints, salted nuts, pumpkin seeds, and pretzels. Then they made her wink her nose on and off for them just one more time. Don't fall off your broom, little witch, said one lady fondly as Blanche ran down the front steps. Afterwards, the lady peeped out the window over the door and gave a scream. I'm positively sure I saw that little girl hop on her broom and fly away. The other people at the party roared with laughter and wouldn't believe she wasn't joking. Aloft in the late-night air, Blanche wasn't laughing. She was worried. It looked as though after all her trouble in trying to get started on time, she was going to be late anyhow. As she came to Dead Man's Bluff for a landing, she could see all of the witches in the scurry lined up in flight formation. Minnie Max was pulling out her watch to show Josephine and saying triumphantly, You see, I told you she'd be late again. Blanche settled down meekly at the end of the formation. At least they hadn't taken off yet. Scurry number 13 made a beautiful showing against the moon that Halloween night, and afterwards they danced and sang and had refreshments up on Dead Man's Bluff. Josephine ladled out the brew. Blanche passed around the nuts, candy, pretzels, and the 3 jelly donuts carefully cut in quarters. Mighty good donuts, said the grand madam, looking around for more. Where did you say you got them, Blanche? Out trick-or-treating, said Blanche. That's what made me late tonight. But you meet the most interesting people that way. If you ladies think you can find time for it next Halloween, I'll take you along too. End of The Blue-Nosed Witch. Recorded by April 6090.
The Five Brothers, from the book Icelandic Fairy Tales, translated by Mrs. A.W. Hall. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Five Brothers. Once upon a time, long years ago, when giants still lived upon the earth, there dwelt an old man and his wife in a small wooden hut, sheltered from the rough winter winds by the tall mountains and rocks that surrounded it. The world would have said they were very poor, but they thought themselves rich, for they had 5 handsome, healthy boys who were the delight of their eyes. There was only a year's difference in age between the lads, and they were always together. One day, the old couple went to cut grass on a slope some distance off, leaving the boys alone at home. It was a bright, warm morning, and tired of playing indoors, the children went out into the little garden, and soon their merry shouts were heard echoing from the hills. Presently, up the path towards them came an old woman, feeble and lame. "May an old woman beg for a draught of water?" she said in a weak voice. Stopping their games at once, the eldest boy ran to the well, while the others made her sit down by the door and rest. In a moment he was back with a pitcher of cool, sparkling water. "There, Granny," he said, "that will refresh you. I let the bucket run down ever so far, to make the water nice and cold." The old dame thanked him heartily, and, having quenched her thirst, asked what their names were. The boys laughed merrily. "We have no names," they said. "We are all so near in age that we do everything together, and when father or mother want anything, they just call out, 'Boys,' and there we are, always at hand." "You have kind hearts," the old woman said. "You are good to the aged and feeble. I was nearly dying of thirst, and could not have gone further without your help. Would that I could reward you as I should like. Alas, I have not the power. But one thing I can do for you. You shall no longer be nameless. I am going to bestow a name on each. You, my young cupbearer," turning to the eldest boy, "shall be called Watch Well. Your brothers, Hold Well, Hit Well, Spy Well, and Climb Well. May these names in the future bring you good fortune as a reward for your kindness to a poor old woman." Then she bade them goodbye, reminded them once more of their names, told them to act up to them, and turned away down the path. In the evening, when their parents returned, the boys related what had occurred and repeated the strange names they had been given. The old people were much astonished, and asked where the stranger had come from and all particulars about her. But the boys could only tell what had happened, and the whole thing would soon have been forgotten had it not been for the names. These they did not forget, and, strange to say, the more they were used, the more the owner of each name seemed to develop the special quality that his name denoted. Watchwell, in addition, constituting himself the general guardian of the 5. Was there a burden to carry, Holdwell's strong arms were ready. Did the parents require faggots for the winter? Hitwell would cut a pile up in the dark pine woods on the mountains that gladdened their hearts. Not a rabbit or bird could escape the keen eyes of Spywell, and by constant practice, little Climewell could scale the steepest cliffs along the fjord. Years rolled on. The bright boys had grown up into tall, handsome young men, and all this time they had never crossed the high rocky hills that walled in their valley, never seen the great world that lay outside. But now that they were men, a great wish was rising in their hearts to go forth from the old home and play their part among other men. The old people gave them their blessing, and bade them continue to stand by one another as they had ever done, for if they only did that, there was nothing they could not achieve. And so the young men departed, following the steep track over the high mountains at first, and then gradually leaving the hill country behind them as they went ever onwards. Sometimes they rested at a farmhouse, sometimes in a village, but nowhere did they find any permanent work. Many a farmer would gladly have engaged Watchwell and Spywell to guard his flocks, but he had no employment for Holdwell and Climewell, and when the last 2 could have joined the village lads in fishing or seabird hunting, there was again no post for the other 3. Still, they would not be discouraged. They had stout hearts and strong limbs, and the good fortune they sought must be found elsewhere. So on they went, climbing high mountains and fording swift rivers, till at last they entered an interminable dark pine wood with a tangled undergrowth of brambles and tall ferns. Hitwell cleared a path before them, and at length they emerged on a vast plain. The sun was setting and pouring a flood of crimson, gold, and purple over the scene before them. The rays lit up the tall spires and high gray walls of a large city, and turned the broad flowing river that encircled it into molten gold. The brothers stood still, entranced. "It must be the city of the king," cried Watchwell at length. "Yes," said Spywell. "Look, there is the royal flag flying on the tower of the palace." They soon traversed the plain, and as darkness began to fall, they arrived at the great drawbridge over the river, and were directed to the palace by the warder. The king received them, and listened to their request for employment in his service. The brothers were such fine, handsome fellows that he was much taken with them as they stood before him. They were very tall, and had bright blue eyes and fair curling hair. He told them that he could give employment to all 5, if they would remain throughout the winter at his court, and watch and guard his daughters at the coming Christmas Eve. "Do not, however, pledge yourselves to stay until you learn the nature of the task that lies before you," he said. "For I have made a vow that the life of the next man who fails in this duty shall be forfeited. Perhaps you 5 brothers acting together can be more careful than strangers. Now listen. 2 years ago," he went on, "I had 5 fair daughters, but alas, the Christmas before last, my golden-haired Elma disappeared mysteriously in the dead of night. Search was made in all directions. No trace of her could be found. Last Christmas Eve, the princess's apartments were carefully watched and guarded. No strangers were admitted, only old and faithful servants were near them. But when morning came, Irene, my second daughter, was nowhere to be found, nor was there any sign of her captor's footsteps near the window of the room where she slept. I have now made a vow, and I shall keep it. But I also offer a reward. He who defends them faithfully this year shall wed the next eldest princess who would, without his care, have disappeared, and he shall be to me as a son. It will be death or honor. Choose, young men, now, while you are still quite free." "We will stay and guard the princesses," they cried with one voice. "It is a task that will call all our qualities into full play. No robber can escape the eyes of Spywell. Holdwell will act up to his name, till Climewell and Hitwell reach him, and I—" and Watchwell drew himself up proudly, "I will be the one to forfeit my life if we fail." So they remained at the court and became great favorites with the king, who began to feel almost sorry that he had imposed sentence of death on the man who should fail to defend his daughters. He therefore determined to do what he could to make them safe, and caused a great tower to be built onto the palace, with thick walls and windows very high up, and here the princesses were to sleep on Christmas Eve. And now the time drew near. As usual, great festivities were held for several days. On the last night, when the dancing and merrymaking were all over, the 3 princesses, Frida, Ida, and Maya, were led to the tower by the king, attended by their ladies. As they lay down on the big couch, covered with silken embroideries, he bade them a last good night, and charged the 5 brothers to guard them with their lives. Then he left the tower, double locking the great iron door that led into the rest of the castle. All was still. The brothers lay down on a rough bench in the antechamber, but the door of the princess's room was wide open, and a lamp was kept burning there. It had been a long and tiring day, and the younger brothers were soon fast asleep. But Watchwell never closed an eye. Wrapped in his long cloak, he leant against the wall and watched. The night drew on. But what was that? He thought he saw a dark shadow slowly approach the window of the princess's room. As he looked, a monstrous hand opened the lattice and stretched out gropingly towards the couch on which the king's daughters lay asleep. Watchwell touched his brothers. In an instant, Holdwell had grasped the mysterious hand so tightly that the owner could not move it, and Hitwell, with one blow of his sword, severed it from the wrist. A terrible, wild cry of pain and baffled anger filled the air, and, looking forth, the brothers saw a fearful giant striding rapidly away from the palace and shaking his remaining hand threateningly towards the tower. The noise had aroused the king, who was quickly on the spot, while Watchwell and his brothers hurried after the monster. Faster and faster he went, seeing he was pursued, but, though he was speedily out of sight, Spywell's keen eye traced his footsteps all the way. On they went, till at last they came to the foot of a high mountain. Steep and precipitous before them the sides rose up, no foothold to be seen anywhere. Climwell, however, never hesitated. He showed his brothers a strong silken cord that he always carried with him. Then, making a bold spring to a tiny ledge he had noticed, he commenced to climb, never taking a false step, till he reached the summit in safety. Then, lowering the silken rope, he drew up his brothers one after the other. When they reached the top, they found an enormous cavern, and just inside the entrance sat a huge giantess on a low stool, crying bitterly. The brothers asked what ailed her. "What matters it to you?" she said, and cried more than ever. But at last she told them that the previous night her husband had lost one of his hands, and she feared he would die, he was in such terrible pain. Then they told her that they could heal her husband if she would let them in. But no one, they said, must be there but ourselves. We must bind all others, lest they should find out the secret of our healing power. The giantess, who was quite as wicked as her husband, and had hoped to entice these young men, by her pretended grief, into the cavern, so as to provide a dinner for herself and her husband, did not at all like the suggestion of being bound, but she thought perhaps they might be able to heal her husband first. So she submitted for the moment, comforting herself with the hope that she could easily break the rope and set herself free when the young men had cured her husband. Holdwell bound her with Climwell's strong silken rope, and then they passed into the inner cavern. The giant was lying on his couch, and gave a howl of rage when he saw them. But, crippled by the loss of his hand, he was no match for the young men, who speedily put an end to him. Then they also killed the wicked giantess, who had quite a heap of human bones beside her, and proceeded to explore the inner cavern. They thought it might, perhaps, contain some hidden treasure, but nothing was to be found, and they were on the point of leaving when Spywell descried a small door cunningly let into the rock. Speedily breaking it open, a subterranean passage was seen, leading to another cavern, and there they discovered the two lost princesses, Elma, very pale and emaciated, whilst Irene, who had not been in prison so long, was more rosy and not so thin. The giant had evidently intended securing all 5 princesses before eating them. The king's daughters were greatly overjoyed when they saw their noble deliverers, and heard that they were prisoners no longer. They quickly departed, Spywell and Climwell having discovered an easier road for them to return by. They arrived at the palace as night was falling, and the joy of the king at having his 5 daughters united once more can well be imagined. A great banquet was hastily prepared, and before the assembled nobles and guests, he related the brave deeds of Watchwell and his brothers, and announced that he had decided to wed his 5 daughters to the 5 heroes. "It is but right and fitting that men such as these, brave, noble, and true, should reign over this land when I am gone," he said. "And to whom could I more worthily entrust my dear daughters than to those who have saved their lives?" Never was there so magnificent a wedding feast. It lasted a whole month, and the dresses of the 5 princesses were perfect marvels of gold and silver embroidery and precious stones. Then to each brother was appointed a position in the state, which would call his special quality into play. They lived long and happily with their respective wives, greatly beloved and honored by all, and when at length the old king died, Watchwell succeeded to the throne, and his wise and good reign, together with his beautiful and beloved Queen Elma, is still spoken of to this day. End of The Five Brothers, from the book Icelandic Fairy Tales, translated by Mrs. A.W. Hall, read by Jennifer Fournier, Sandia Park, New Mexico, USA.
The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Happy Prince. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes, he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. He was very much admired indeed. "He is as beautiful as a weathercock," remarked one of the town councillors, who wished to gain a reputation for having artistic tastes. "Only not quite so useful," he added, fearing lest people should think him unpractical, which he really was not. "Why can't you be like the Happy Prince?" asked a sensible mother of her little boy who was crying for the moon. "The Happy Prince never dreams of crying for anything." "I am glad there is someone in the world who is quite happy," muttered a disappointed man as he gazed at the wonderful statue. "He looks just like an angel," said the charity children as they came out of the cathedral in their bright scarlet cloaks and their clean white pinafores. "How do you know?" said the mathematical master. "You have never seen one." "Ah, but we have, in our dreams," answered the children. And the mathematical master frowned and looked very severe, for he did not approve of children dreaming. One night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind, for he was in love with the most beautiful reed. He had met her early in the spring as he was flying down the river after a big yellow moth, and had been so attracted by her slender waist that he had stopped to talk to her. "Shall I love you?" said the swallow, who liked to come to the point at once, and the reed made him a low bow. So he flew round and round her, touching the water with his wings and making silver ripples. This was his courtship, and it lasted all through the summer. "It is a ridiculous attachment," twittered the other swallows. "She has no money, and far too many relations." And indeed, the river was quite full of reeds. Then, when the autumn came, they all flew away. After they had gone, he felt lonely and began to tire of his lady love. "She has no conversation," he said, "and I am afraid that she is a coquette, for she is always flirting with the wind." And certainly, whenever the wind blew, the reed made the most graceful curtsies. "I admit that she is domestic," he continued, "but I love traveling, and my wife, consequently, should love traveling also. Will you come away with me?" he said finally to her. But the reed shook her head. She was so attached to her home. "You have been trifling with me," he cried. "I am off to the pyramids. Goodbye." And he flew away. All day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. "Where shall I put up?" he said. "I hope the town has made preparations." Then he saw the statue on the tall column. "I will put up there," he cried. "It is a fine position with plenty of fresh air." So he alighted just between the feet of the Happy Prince. "I have a golden bedroom," he said softly to himself as he looked round, and he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. "What a curious thing!" he cried. "There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. The climate in the north of Europe is really dreadful. The reed used to like the rain, but that was merely her selfishness." Then another drop fell. "What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off?" he said. "I must look for a good chimney pot," and he determined to fly away. But before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw— ah, what did he see? The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. "Who are you?" he said. "I am the happy prince." "Why are you weeping then?" asked the swallow. "You have quite drenched me." "When I was alive and had a human heart," answered the statue, "I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace of Sans Souci, where sorrow is not allowed to enter. In the daytime I played with my companions in the garden, and in the evening I led the dance in the great hall. Round the garden ran a very lofty wall, but I never cared to ask what lay beyond it. Everything about me was so beautiful. My courtiers called me the Happy Prince, and happy indeed I was, if pleasure be happiness. So I lived, and so I died. And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see all the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep." "What? Is he not solid gold?" said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks out loud. "Far away," continued the statue in a low, musical voice, "far away, in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse, red hands, all pricked by the needle, for she is a seamstress. She is embroidering passion flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the Queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking for oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water, so he is crying. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal, and I cannot move." "I am waited for in Egypt," said the swallow. "My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep in the tomb of the great king. The king is there himself in his painted coffin. He is wrapped in yellow linen and embalmed with spices. Round his neck is a chain of pale green jade, and his hands are like withered leaves." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me for one night and be my messenger? The boy is so thirsty, and the mother so sad." "I don't think I like boys," answered the swallow. "Last summer, when I was staying on the river, there were 2 rude boys, the miller's sons, who were always throwing stones at me. They never hit me, of course. We swallows fly far too well for that, and besides, I come of a family famous for its agility. But still, it was a mark of disrespect." But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. "It is very cold here," he said, "but I will stay with you for one night and be your messenger." "Thank you, little swallow," said the prince. So the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. He passed by the cathedral tower, where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. "How wonderful the stars are," he said to her, "and how wonderful is the power of love." "I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball," she answered. "I have ordered passion flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy." He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging to the masts of the ships. He passed over the ghetto and saw the old Jews bargaining with each other and weighing out money in copper scales. At last he came to the poor house and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep, she was so tired. In he hopped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. "How cool I feel," said the boy. "I must be getting better," and he sank into a delicious slumber. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. "It is curious," he remarked. but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold." "That is because you have done a good action," said the prince. And the little swallow began to think, and then he fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. When day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. "What a remarkable phenomenon," said the professor of ornithology as he was passing over the bridge. "A swallow in winter!" And he wrote a long letter about it to the local newspaper. Everyone quoted it. It was full of so many words that they could not understand. "Tonight I go to Egypt," said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. He visited all the public monuments and sat a long time on top of the church steeple. Wherever he went, the sparrows chirruped and said to each other, "What a distinguished stranger!" So he enjoyed himself very much. When the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "Have you any commissions for Egypt?" he cried. "I am just starting." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me one night longer?" "I am waited for in Egypt," answered the swallow. "Tomorrow my friends will fly up to the second cataract. The river horse couches there among the bulrushes, and on a great granite throne sits the god Memnon. All night long he watches the stars, and when the morning star shines, he utters one cry of joy, and then he is silent. At noon, the yellow lions come down to the water's edge to drink. They have eyes like green barrels, and their roar is louder than the roar of the cataract." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "far away across the city I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in a tumbler by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. His hair is brown and crisp, and his lips are red as a pomegranate, and he has large and dreamy eyes. He is trying to finish a play for the director of the theater, but he is too cold to write any more. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint. I will wait with you one night longer," said the swallow, who really had a good heart. "Shall I take him another ruby?" "Alas, I have no ruby now," said the prince. "My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. Pluck out one of them and take it to him. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy food and firewood and finish his play." "Dear prince," said the swallow, "I cannot do that," and he began to weep. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So the swallow plucked out the prince's eye and flew away to the student's garret. It was easy enough to get in, as there was a hole in the roof. Through this he darted, and came into the room. The young man had his head buried in his hands, so he did not hear the flutter of the bird's wings, and when he looked up, he found the beautiful sapphire lying on the withered violets. "I am beginning to be appreciated," he cried. "This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play," and he looked quite happy. The next day, the swallow flew down to the harbor. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailors hauling big chests out of the hold with ropes. "Heave ahoy!" they shouted as each chest came up. "I am going to Egypt," cried the swallow, but nobody minded, and when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "I am come to bid you good-bye," he cried. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "will you not stay with me one night longer?" "It is winter," answered the swallow, "and the chill snow will soon be here. In Egypt, the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. My companions are building a nest in the temple of Baalbec, and the pink and white doves are watching them and cooing to each other. Dear prince, I must leave you, but I will never forget you, and next spring I will bring you back 2 beautiful jewels in place of those you have given away. The ruby shall be redder than a red rose, and the sapphire shall be as blue as the great sea." "In the square below," said the happy prince, "there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring home some money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye, and give it to her, and her father will not beat her." "I will stay with you one night longer," said the swallow, "but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then." "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "do as I command you." So he plucked out the prince's other eye, and darted down with it. He swooped past the match girl, and slipped the jewel into the palm of her hand. "What a lovely bit of glass!" cried the little girl, and she ran home, laughing. Then the swallow came back to the prince. "You are blind now," he said, "so I will stay with you, always." "No, little swallow," said the poor prince, "you must go away to Egypt." "I will stay with you, always," said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder, and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. He told him of the red ibises, who stand in long rows on the banks of the Nile and catch goldfish in their beaks; of the Sphinx, who is as old as the world itself, and lives in the desert, and knows everything; of the merchants who walk slowly by the side of their camels, and carry amber beads in their hands; of the king of the mountains of the moon, who is as black as ebony, and worships a large crystal; of the great green snake that sleeps in a palm tree, and has 20 priests to feed it with honey cakes; and of the pygmies who sail over a big lake on large flat leaves, and are always at war with the butterflies. "Dear little swallow," said the prince, "you tell me of marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and of women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there." So the swallow flew over the great city, and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. He flew into dark lanes, and saw the white faces of starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. Under the archway of a bridge, 2 little boys were lying in one another's arms to try and keep themselves warm. "How hungry we are," they said. "You must not lie here," shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. Then he flew back and told the prince what he had seen. "I am covered with fine gold," said the prince. "You must take it off, leaf by leaf, and give it to my poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy." Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off, till the happy prince looked quite dull and grey. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold he brought to the poor, and the children's faces grew rosier, and they laughed and played games in the street. "We have bread now," they cried. Then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver, they were so bright and glistening. Long icicles, like crystal daggers, hung down from the eaves of the houses. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking, and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew that he was going to die. He had just strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. "Goodbye, dear prince," he murmured. "Will you let me kiss your hand?" "I am glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow," said the prince. "You have stayed too long here, but you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you." "It is not to Egypt that I am going," said the swallow. "I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not?" And he kissed the happy prince on the lips, and fell down, dead, at his feet. At that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the leaden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. Early the next morning, The mayor was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the Happy Prince looks," he said. "How shabby indeed," cried the town councillors, who always agreed with the mayor, and they went up to look at it. "The ruby has fallen out of his sword, his eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer," said the mayor. "In fact, he is little better than a beggar." "Little better than a beggar," said the town councillors. "And here is actually a dead bird at his feet," continued the mayor. "We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here." And the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. So they pulled down the statue of the Happy Prince. "As he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful," said the art professor at the university. Then they melted the statue in a furnace, and the mayor held a meeting of the corporation to decide what was to be done with the metal. "We must have another statue, of course," he said. "And it shall be a statue of myself." "Of myself," said each of the town councillors, and they quarreled. When I last heard of them, they were quarreling still. "What a strange thing," said the overseer of the workmen at the foundry. "This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away." So they threw it on a dust heap where the dead swallow was also lying. "Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird. "You have rightly chosen," said God, "for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore, and in my city of gold the Happy Prince shall praise me." End of The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. Read by StoryThyme.
Hold Fast by ALOE. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Nay, my child, I have nothing else to hold by, either in life or death, but the great truth that Christ died for sinners. It's a joyful thing to hold fast, the blessed hope of everlasting life, which God hath given us through our Lord Jesus Christ. The speaker was Peter Ross, a blind and aged man, with a bald head and silvery beard, who, clad in a pauper's dress, had come, as he was allowed once a fortnight to do, to visit the house of his son. The listener was a rosy-cheeked girl, about 9 years of age, who, seated at his feet and resting her little arms on his knee, looked up lovingly into his face. "Ah, grandfather," said Rose, "if you did not hope to go to heaven, I don't know who else could. You're so good, so patient, so kind. You have served God all your life long. You have never been given to drinking and swearing, like the wicked men in our court. And I really think that you know nearly half of the Bible by heart. I'm certain that you deserve heaven." "Rose, Rose," cried the old man earnestly, "my only plea for heaven is this. I, a poor sinner and nothing at all, but Jesus Christ is my all in all." "I can't tell how it is," said Rose, looking into his face with a puzzled expression. "The best people seem to think themselves the worst. If I was half as good as you are, grandfather, I'd be quite sure of getting to heaven." "By your good works, my child." "Yes, by my good works," repeated Rose. "I can see why bad people hope to be saved only by the Lord. But it must be so very different with pious people like you." "Rose," said the blind old man, "do you think that I'd ever pass one day without sin?" "I'm sure that you do," replied Rose. "I never knew you to do anything wrong." "If my salvation were to depend upon my passing one waking hour without sin, Rose, my poor soul would be lost. Remember that God looks at the heart. His pure eyes read the evil thought. He knows not only the sinful things that we do, but the duties which we leave undone. All our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. The truth is written in the Bible." "But I can't see," persisted the little girl, "that you need to be saved by the Lord. just in the same way as Luke Dobson did, who was run over by a cart when he was drunk. He lay ill for months and months, and Father says that he repented and hoped to go to heaven at last, because the Lord died for sinners. Now, there must be a very great difference between his case and yours, for he was once a very bad man, and treated his wife very cruelly when he had been at the public. My dear child, said the aged Christian, laying his thin hand on the curly head of Rose, I have no more power to reach heaven by my works than poor Luke Dobson had by his. The blood of Jesus Christ, which cleanseth from all sin, is just as much needed to wash away mine as it was to wash away his. He depended on the mercy of the Saviour, and I have naught else to depend on. I can't understand that, said Rose. I'll tell you what happened to me in my youth, Rose, nigh 60 years ago, when I was not much older than you are. It seems to me a sort of picture, as it were, of the way in which sinners are saved, and how there's nothing that we have to trust but God's mercy in Christ. I should like to hear what happened to you, grandfather, but I want to ask just one question first. If the wicked and the steady all need mercy alike, where's the use of doing good and trying to put away our sins? Why should we not live as we choose and trust that all will come right in the end? Old Peter looked grave as he replied, because no one who really belongs to the Saviour can bear to continue in wickedness. The Lord died not only to save his people from hell, but from sin, and they hate and dread the one as they hate and dread the other. I'll try and show you what I mean by my story. It's nigh 60 years ago, as I said, when I was a young, strong, active lad, that I lived for some months by the seashore. Our dwelling was near the beach, in a place where the cliffs were rugged and high, so high that when we looked front the top of one of them, men walking on the sands beneath seemed little bigger than crows. I set out one day to gather shells, for that was a wonderful, wonderful place for shells, and the gentry, as came to the village hard by, used often to buy them from us. I wasn't going alone. I took with me my brother, poor Sam. He and I went together, each with a bag to hold the shells, which was hung by a long string round our necks, so as to leave our hands quite free. The last thing our mother said to us afore as we started was this: Mind, lads, and don't go too far, for the tide is on the turn, and the waves will be running high, and if ye go as far as High Cliff, there's danger that you may both be drowned. No fear, mother, said I. Even if the tide should come in upon us, I reckon that I'm active and strong enough to climb to the top of the cliff. But I could not say as much for Sam. With his weak arms and the swelling on his ankle, I know that he had no chance of climbing, so I'll keep out of harm's way for his sake. And for your own too, Peter, said Sam as we walked along the beach together. You're strong and active, to be sure, but you're no more able than I be to climb up such a mighty high cliff. There may be two opinions as to that, said I, for I had a great notion of my own powers, and prided myself on being agile as a goat on the rocks. Well, pursued the blind pauper, we had plenty of luck that day in finding shells on the shore. Both of us filled our bags, and we were so eager and pleased with our success that we wandered on farther and farther, and scarce gave a thought to the tide, till we saw the white creamy foam tossed on the sand from the waves that came rolling and tumbling inshore, and we looked up and saw the great white cliff rising high and bluff before us. I say, Sam, cried I, just see how the tide's coming in. 'Tis time for us to make the best of our way back to mother. My brother turned white as a sheet. 'Tis too late for that, said he, giving a wilder waste of heaving billows. For the coast just there made a bend like a crescent, and though we stood upon dry land still, the white-topped waves, both afore and behind us, were rolling right up to the cliff. Where we had walked dry-shod not an hour before, there was nothing to be seen but the waters, which would soon cover the place where we were. What's to be done? Cried my brother, as he looked upon the great rocky wall before us. Keep a good heart, said I. I'll climb up to the top of the cliff, and then I'll get help and a rope, and we'll draw you up to safety. So I put down my bag, and I pulled off my jacket, for it was clear enough that I could not climb with them. I knew well, though I didn't choose to say it, that it would be hard work to get to the top of so high and steep a cliff. But I did not know. I would not believe that it was impossible for me to do so. By Tense straining of every muscle, clasping, clutching at every jutting crag or little rock plant that offered a hold, I managed to struggle up a few yards. But the way grew steeper and harder. I could scarcely find place for my foot or hold for my hand. The earth was slipping beneath me. I panted, I gasped, I strained, feeling myself falling. I tried with a violent effort to catch hold of a little stump that secured to be just beyond my reach. I caught it, but lost my footing. Hung for a moment by one hand, then the stump gave way, and, with a cry of fear, I fell heavily down the rock. "Oh, grandfather, were you much hurt?" exclaimed Rose, who had listened with breathless interest to Peter's account of his perilous adventure. "Not badly hurt," said the blind man, "but enough bruised and shaken to be kept from the folly of trying the climb again." "Then you were just in the same case as your brother, though you had fancied yourself so much better able to get to the top than he." "That's it. That's what I wished you to see," cried Peter. "It is for that I tell you the story. We were alike helpless, my child. The strong and the weak, the active and the maimed. Neither could reach the top. Both were just in the same danger of being drowned by the coming tide. And so it is with the matters of the soul. One man seems wiser, another better, another bolder than his fellows. But the wisest, the boldest, the best, can never reach heaven by their efforts. The way is too high, too steep to be climbed. Their good deeds break away. They can't support them. They can't hold them up from destruction." "But how were you saved?" exclaimed Rose, more eager to hear the story than to gather its moral. "My brother and I felt that there was but one thing which we could do. We must loudly call out for assistance. We cried loud again and again. We lifted up our voices with all our might, and as God in His mercy ordered, the sound of our cry was heard from the top of the cliff. And so it is with the sinner, my child, when he feels that he is in danger of eternal death, when he finds that he has no power in himself to help himself, and that unless God comes to his aid, he is lost and ruined forever. The cry, 'God be merciful to me, a sinner,' is heard even above the heavens, and mercy comes to the rescue." "Was a rope let down from the top of the cliff?" asked the impatient Rose. "A rope was let down," replied Peter, "and it was long enough and strong enough to save us. It was let down not a minute too soon, for already the sand on which we stood was washed by every advancing wave. Sam was terribly frightened, at once caught hold of the rope, and clung to it as for his life. Nay, if I remember right, he fastened it around his body. But my courage, or rather presumption, had risen once more. As soon as I found that means were provided to draw us safely beyond the reach of danger, I put on my jacket again, and passed the string of my bag of shells round my neck. 'Since I have not to climb,' cried I, 'there's no use in leaving them behind. I have no mind to part with one of them.' Now mark my words, Rose, my child. I was thinking in an earthly manner, as you thought just now when you said, 'If the wicked and the steady all need mercy alike, what's the use of doing good and putting away our sins?' I believed that the rope was enough to save me, and so in truth it was. But how could I hold fast by the rope when I carried a weight round my neck?" I see," exclaimed Rose. "You must leave your heavy bag behind you, for though the rope might not break, you could not keep your hold on it while the weight was dragging you down. No more than any man who wilfully keeps one sin can continue safely to hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life. He but deceives himself if he ever tries to do so. I soon found out, as I was drawn upwards, what a fearful mistake I had made. I had not risen many feet above the sands when a horrible dread arose in my mind that I should never be able to hold on till I had reached the top of the cliff. The muscles of my arms ached terribly, my fingers could scarcely keep their grasp, and the string around my neck seemed to choke me like the gripe of an iron hand. "Make haste!" I gasped out in agony, scarce able to bring out the words. "Oh, be quick, or I shall be forced to let go." "Hold fast, brother, hold fast!" shouted poor Sam in mortal terror at my danger. The men above were straining every nerve to pull us up before my strength should fail me, but oh, how fearfully slow we seemed to ascend. The strain on my arms now was torture. My brain grew dizzy. I could scarcely breathe. I had but one thought, one maddening wish, to get rid of the fatal bag. It seemed to grow heavier every moment. It was as if some barbarous foe were pulling me down to destruction. I felt that unless I could be relieved of the weight, I must let go and be dashed to pieces. I dare not attempt to cling by one wary hand, so as to use the other to untie the fatal string. I cried in despairing agony to God, for I was beyond all help from man. I know not to this day how his mercy wrought, whether the weight on it snapped the string, or whether in my struggles the knot was untied. But never, till my dying hour, shall I forget the sense of relief when suddenly something gave way. I felt that the weight was gone. I heard a splash in the waters below, and in another minute was firmly grasped by a hand stretched out from above. "Oh, grandfather, what a mercy!" exclaimed Rose, drawing a long breath. Her heart had beat fast at the account of such terrible danger. "A mercy indeed," said the old man solemnly, clasping his hands together as memory recalled the awful scene. "Had that bag, instead of shells, contained all the wealth in the world, how thankful should I have been to have dropped it into the sea forever! As that weight was to my body, so is sin to the soul. In vain do we grasp the hope of salvation. In vain do we seem to be raised from a state of danger by the mercy of Christ, if we resolve not to try to cast from us every sin that our God condemns. Without holiness, no man shall see the Lord. We must cast away every weight and the sin that doth so easily beset us, not in our own poor strength, but in the power of prayer, looking to God, trusting to God, ready to give up everything for God. Then will his love never fail us. He will never leave us to perish. By his grace shall we hold fast to the end and rejoice forever in his presence. End of Hold Fast by ALOE. Read by Chris MP77.
How the Camel Got His Hump by Rudyard Kipling. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Now, this is the next tale, and it tells how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of the howling desert because he did not want to work, and besides, he was a howler himself. So he ate sticks and thorns, and tamarisk and milkweed and prickles, most excruciating idle. And when anybody spoke to him, he said, "Humph!" just "humph!" and no more. Presently the horse came to him on Monday morning, with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the horse went away and told the man. Presently the dog came to him, with a stick in his mouth, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and fetch and carry like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the dog went away and told the man. Presently the ox came to him, with a yoke on his neck, and said, "Camel, oh camel, come and plow like the rest of us." "Humph!" said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day the man called the horse and the dog and the ox together, and said, "Three, oh three, I'm very sorry for you, with the world so new and all, but that humph thing in the desert can't work, or he would have been here by now, so I'm going to leave him alone, and you must work double time to make up for it." That made the three very angry, with the world so new and all, and they held a palaver, an indaba, and a puncheon, and a powwow at the edge of the desert, and the camel came chewing on milkweed, most excruciating idle, and laughed at them. Then he said, "Humph!" and went away again. Presently there came along a djinn in charge of all deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Djinns always travel that way because it is magic, and he stopped to palaver and powwow with the three. "Djinn of all deserts," said the horse, "is it right for any one to be idle, with the world so new and all?" "Certainly not," said the djinn. "Well," said the horse, "there's a thing in the middle of your howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs. He hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot." "Whew!" said the djinn, whistling, "that's my camel, for all the gold in Arabia. What does he say about it?" "He says, 'Hoof!'" said the dog, "and he won't fetch and carry." "Does he say anything else?" "Only 'hoof!' and he won't plow," said the ox. "Very good," said the djinn. I'll humph him if you will kindly wait a minute." Then the djinn rolled himself up in a dust cloak, and took a bearing across the desert, and found the camel most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water. "My long and bubbly friend," said the djinn, "what's this I hear of your doing no work, with the world so new and all?" "Humph!" said the camel. The djinn sat down, with his chin in his hand, and began to think a great magic, while the camel looked at his own reflection in the pool of water. "You've given the three extra work ever since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciatingly idleness," said the djinn, and he went on thinking magics, with his chin in his hand. "Humph!" said the camel. "I shouldn't say that again if I were you," said the djinn. "You might say it once too often. Bubbles, I want you to work." And the camel said, "Humph!" again. But no sooner had he said it than he saw his back, that he was so proud of, puffing up into a great big lolloping humph. "Do you see that?" said the djinn. "That's your very own humph, that you've brought upon your very own self by not working. Today is Thursday, and you've done no work since Monday, when the work began. Now you are going to work." "How can I," said the camel, "with this humph on my back?" "That's made a purpose," said the djinn, "all because you missed those 3 days. You will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your humph, and don't you ever say I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert and go to the 3, and behave. Humph yourself." And the camel humphed himself, humph and all, and went away to join the 3. And from that day to this the camel always wears a humph. We call it a hump now, not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world, and he has never yet learned how to behave. The camel's hump is an ugly lump, which well you may see at the zoo, but uglier yet is the hump we get from having too little to do. Kiddies and grown-ups to woo-woo. If we haven't enough to do woo-woo, we get the hump, camel's hump, that hump that is black and blue. We climb out of bed with a frowsly head and a snarly yarly voice. We shiver and scowl, and we grunt and we growl at our bath and our boots and our toys. And there ought to be a corner for me, and I know there is one for you, when we get the hump, the camel's hump, the hump that is black and blue. The cure for this ill is not to sit still, or frowst with a book by the fire, but to take a large hoe and a shovel also, and dig till you gently perspire. And then you will find that the sun and the wind, and the djinn and the garden too, have lifted the hump, the horrible hump, the hump that is black and blue. I get it as well as you woo-woo. If I hadn't enough to do woo-woo, we all get hump, camel's hump, kiddies and grown-ups too. End of How the Camel Got His Hump by Rudyard Kipling. Read by Jeff DeFore. How the Rhinoceros Got His Skin by Rudyard Kipling. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time, on an uninhabited island on the shores of the Red Sea, there lived a Parsee from whose hat the rays of the sun were reflected in the more than oriental splendor. And the Parsee lived by the Red Sea with nothing but his hat and his knife and a cooking stove, of the kind that you must particularly never touch. And one day he took the flour and water and currants and plums and sugars and things, and made himself one cake which was 2 feet across and 3 feet thick. It was indeed a superior comestible that's magic, and he put it on a stove because he was allowed to cook on the stove, and he baked it till it was all done brown and smelt most sentimental. But just as he was going to eat it, there came down to the beach from the altogether uninhabited interior one rhinoceros with a horn on his nose, 2 piggy eyes, and a few manners. In those days, the rhinoceros' skin fitted him quite tight. There were no wrinkles in it anywhere. He looked exactly like a Noah's Ark's rhinoceros, but of course much bigger. All the same, he had no manners then, he has no manners now, and he will never have any manners. He said, "How?" And the Parsee left the cake and climbed to the top of the palm tree with nothing on but his hat, from which the rays of the sun were always reflected in a more than oriental splendor. And the rhinoceros upset the oil stove with his nose, and the cake rolled on the sand, and he spiked that cake on the horn of his nose, and he ate it, and he went away, waving his tail, to the desolate and exclusively uninhabited interior which abuts on the islands of Mazanderan, Socotra, and promontories of the larger equinox. Then the Parsee came down from his palm tree and put the stove on his legs and recited the following sloka, which, as you have not heard, I will now proceed to relate. Them that takes the cakes, which the Parsee man bakes, makes dreadful mistakes. And there was a great deal more in than that you would think, because 5 weeks later there was a heat wave in the Red Sea, and everybody took off all the clothes they had. The Parsee took off his hat, but the rhinoceros took off his skin and carried it over his shoulder as he came down to the beach to bathe. In those days he unbuttoned it underneath with 3 buttons and looked like a waterproof. He said nothing whatever about the Parsee's cakes, because he had eaten it all, and he never had any manners, then, since, or henceforward. He waddled straight into the water and blew bubbles through his nose, leaving the skin on the beach. Presently the Parsee came by and found the skin, and he smiled one smile that ran all around his face 2 times. Then he danced 3 times around the skin and rubbed his hands. Then he went to his camp and filled his hat with cake crumbs, for the Parsee never ate anything but cake, and never swept out his camp. He took that skin, and he shook that skin, and he scrubbed that skin, and he rubbed that skin just as full of old, dry, stale, tickly cake crumbs and some burned currants as ever it could possibly hold. Then he climbed to the top of the palm tree and waited for the rhinoceros to come out of the water and put it on. And the rhinoceros did. He buttoned it up with 3 buttons, and it tickled like cake crumbs in bed. Then he wanted to scratch, but that made it worse, and he lay down on the sands and rolled and rolled and rolled. And every time he rolled, the cake crumbs tickled him worse and worse and worse. Then he ran to the palm tree and rubbed and rubbed and rubbed himself against it. He rubbed so much and so hard that it rubbed his skin into a great fold over his shoulders, and another fold underneath, where the buttons used to be. But he rubbed the buttons off, and he rubbed some more folds over his legs, and it spoiled his temper. But it didn't make the least difference to the cake crumbs. They were inside his skin, and they tickled. So he went home, very angry indeed and horribly scratchy. And from that day to this every rhinoceros has great folds in his skin and a very bad temper, all on account of the cake crumbs inside. But the Parsee came down from the palm tree, wearing his hat from which the rays of the sun were reflected in the more than oriental splendor, packed up his cooking stove, and went away in the direction of Orotava, Amygdala, and the upland meadows of Anantarivo, and the marshes of Sanaput. This uninhabited island is off Cape Gardefee, by the beaches of Socotra and the pink Arabian Sea, but it's hot, too hot from Suez, for the likes of you and me, ever to go in a P&O, and call on the cake Parsee. End of How the Rhinoceros Got His Skin by Rudyard Kipling.
In the Moonlight by Mrs. W.K. Clifford. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Arnav Darnal. In the Moonlight by Mrs. W.K. Clifford. He picked a buttercup and held it up to her chin. "Do you like butter?" he asked. "Butter?" she exclaimed. "They are not made into butter. They are made into crowns for the Queen. She has a new one every morning." "I'll make you a crown," he said. "You shall wear it tonight." "But where will my throne be?" she asked. "It shall be on the middle step of the stile by the cornfield." So, when the moon rose, I went out to see. He wore a red jacket and his cap with the feather in it. Round her head there was a wreath of buttercups. It was not much like a crown. On one side of the wreath there were some daisies, and on the other was a little bunch of blackberry blossom. "Come and dance in the moonlight," he said. So she climbed up and over the stile, and stood in the cornfield, holding out her 2 hands to him. He took them in his, and then they danced round and round all down the pathway, while the wheat nodded wisely on either side, and the poppies awoke and wondered. On they went, on and on through the cornfield towards the broad green meadows stretching far into the distance. On and on, he shouting for joy, and she laughing out so merrily that the sound travelled to the edge of the wood, and the thrushes heard and dreamed of spring. On they went, on and round, he in his red jacket, and she with the wild flowers dropping one by one from her wreath. On and on in the moonlight, on and on till they had danced all down the cornfield, till they had crossed the green meadows, till they were hidden in the mist beyond. That is all I know, but I think that in the far, far off somewhere, where the moon is shining, He and she still dance along a cornfield, he in his red jacket, and she with the wildflowers dropping from her hair. End of In the Moonlight by Mrs. W.K. Clifford.
The Little Red Hen by Florence White Williams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Little Red Hen. A little red hen lived in a barnyard. She spent almost all of her time walking about the barnyard in her pickety-peckety fashion, scratching everywhere for worms. She dearly loved fat, delicious worms and felt they were absolutely necessary to the health of her children. As often as she found a worm, she would call, "Chuck, chuck, chuck," to her chickies. When they were gathered about her, she would distribute choice morsels of her tidbit. A busy little body was she. A cat usually napped lazily in the barn door, not even bothering herself to scare the rat who ran here and there as he pleased. And as for the pig who lived in the sty, he did not care what happened so long as he could eat and grow fat. One day the little red hen found a seed. It was a wheat seed, but the little red hen was so accustomed to bugs and worms that she supposed this to be some new and perhaps very delicious kind of meat. She bit it gently and found that it resembled a worm in no way whatsoever as to taste, although because it was long and slender, a little red hen might easily be fooled by its appearance. Carrying it about, she made many inquiries as to what it might be. She found it was a wheat seed and that, if planted, it would grow up and when ripe it could be made into flour and then into bread. When she discovered that, she knew it ought to be planted. She was so busy hunting food for herself and her family that, naturally, she thought she ought not to take time to plant it. So she thought of the pig, upon whom time must hang heavily, and of the cat who had nothing to do, and of the great fat rat with his idle hours, and she called loudly, "Who will plant the seed?" But the pig said, "Not I." And the cat said, "Not I." And the rat said, "Not I." "Well then," said the little red hen, "I will." And she did. Then she went on with her daily duties through the long summer days, scratching for worms and feeding her chicks, while the pig grew fat, and the cat grew fat, and the rat grew fat, and the wheat grew tall and ready for harvest. So one day the little red hen chanced to notice how large the wheat was and that the grain was ripe. So she ran about calling briskly, "Who will cut the wheat?" The pig said, "Not I." The cat said, "Not I." And the rat said, "Not I." "Well then," said the little red hen, "I will." And she did. She got the sickle from among the farmer's tools in the barn and proceeded to cut off all of the big plant of wheat. On the ground lay the nicely cut wheat, ready to be gathered and threshed. But the newest and yellowest and downiest of Mrs. Hen's chicks set up a peep, peep, peeping in their most vigorous fashion, proclaiming to the world at large, but most particularly to their mother, that she was neglecting them. Poor little red hen! She felt quite bewildered and hardly knew where to turn. Her attention was sorely divided between her duty to her children and her duty to the wheat for which she felt responsible. So again, in a very hopeful tone, she called out, "Who will thresh the wheat?" But the pig, with a grunt, said, "Not I." And the cat, with a meow, said, "Not I." And the rat, with a squeak, said, "Not I." So the little red hen, looking, it must be admitted, rather discouraged, said, "Well, I will then." And she did. Of course, she had to feed her babies first, though, and when she had gotten them all to sleep for their afternoon nap, she went out and threshed the wheat. Then she called out, "Who will carry the wheat to the mill to be ground?" Turning their backs with snippy glee, that pig said, "Not I." And that cat said, "Not I." And that rat said, "Not I." So the good little red hen could do nothing but say, "I will then," and she did. Carrying the sack of wheat, she trudged off to the distant mill. There she ordered the wheat ground into beautiful white flour. When the miller brought her the flour, she walked slowly back all the way to her own barnyard in her own pickety-peckety fashion. She even managed, in spite of her load, to catch a nice juicy worm now and then, and had one left for the babies when she reached them. Those cunning little fluffballs were so glad to see their mother. For the first time, they really appreciated her. After this really strenuous day, Mrs. Hen retired to her slumbers earlier than usual. Indeed, before the colors came into the sky to herald the setting of the sun, her usual bedtime hour. She would have liked to sleep late in the morning, but her chicks, joining in the morning chorus of the hen yard, drove away all hopes of such a luxury. Even as she sleepily half-opened one eye, the thought came to her that today that wheat must, somehow, be made into bread. She was not in the habit of making bread, although, of course, anyone can make it if he or she follows the recipe with care, and she knew perfectly well that she could do it if necessary. So after her children were fed and made sweet and fresh for the day, she hunted up the pig, the cat, and the rat. Still confident that they would surely help her some day, she sang out, "Who will make the bread?" Alas for the little red hen! Once more her hopes were dashed, for the pig said, "Not I." The cat said, "Not I." And the rat said, "Not I." So the little red hen said once more, "I will then," and she did. Feeling that she might have known all the time that she would have to do it all herself, she went and put on a fresh apron and spotless cook's cap. First of all, she set the dough, as was proper. When it was time, she brought out the molding board and the baking tins, molded the bread, divided it into loaves, and put them into the oven to bake. All the while the cat sat lazily by, giggling and chuckling. And close at hand the vain rat powdered his nose and admired himself in a mirror. In the distance could be heard the long-drawn snores of the dozing pig. At last the great moment arrived. A delicious odor was wafted upon the autumn breeze. Everywhere the barnyard citizens sniffed the air with delight. The red hen ambled in her pickety-peckety way toward the source of all this excitement. Although she appeared to be perfectly calm, in reality she could only with difficulty restrain an impulse to dance and sing, for had she not done all the work on this wonderful bread? Small wonder that she was the most excited person in the barnyard. She did not know whether the bread would be fit to eat, but joy of joys, when the lovely brown loaves came out of the oven, they were done to perfection. Then, probably because she had acquired the habit, the red hen called, "Who will eat the bread?" All the animals in the barnyard were watching hungrily and smacking their lips in anticipation. And the pig said, "I will." The cat said, "I will." The rat said, "I will." But the little red hen said, "No, you won't. I will." And she did. End of The Little Red Hen by Florence White Williams.
Little Red Riding Hood by Charles Perrault. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time there lived in a certain village a little country girl, the prettiest creature that was ever seen. Her mother was excessively fond of her, and her grandmother doted on her still more. This good woman had made for her a little Red Riding Hood, which became the girl so extremely well that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother, having made some custards, said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how thy grandmamma does, for I hear she has been very ill. Carry her a custard, and this little pot of butter." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to find her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through the wood she met up with Gaffer Wolf, who had a very great mind to eat her up, but he dared not because of some faggot makers hard by in the forest. He asked her whither she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stay and hear wolf talk, said to him, "I am going to see my grandmamma and carry her custard and a little pot of butter for my mamma." "Does she live far off?" said the wolf. "Oh, aye," answered Little Red Riding Hood. "It is beyond the mill that you see her, at the first house in the village." "Well," said the wolf, "I'll go and see her too. I'll go this way and you go that, and we shall see who will be there the soonest." The wolf began to run as fast as he could, taking the nearest way, and the little girl went by the furthest about, diverting herself and gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and making nosegays of such little flowers as she met with her. The wolf was not long before he got to the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" "Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf, counterfeiting her voice. "Who has brought you custard and a little pot of butter sent you by mamma?" The good grandmother, who was in bed because she was somewhat ill, cried out, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin and the door opened, and then presently he fell upon the good woman and ate her up in a moment, for it was above 3 days that he had not touched a bit. He shut the door and went into the grandmother's bed, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who had came some time afterward and knocked on the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" Little Red Riding Hood, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was at first afraid, but believing her grandmother had got a cold and was hoarse, answered, "'Tis your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood, who has brought you a custard and a little pot of butter mamma sent you." The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her come in, said to her, hiding himself under the bedclothes, "Put the custard and the little pot of butter upon the stool, and come and lie down with me." Little Red Riding Hood undressed herself and went into the bed, where, being greatly amazed to see how her grandmother looked in her night clothes, she said to her, "Grandmamma, what great arms you've got!" "That is to better the hug thee, my dear." "Grandmamma, what great legs you've got!" "That is to run better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great ears you've got!" "That is to hear the better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great eyes you've got!" "That is to see the better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great teeth you got!" "That is to eat thee up." And, saying these words, the wicked wolf fell upon Little Red Riding Hood and ate her all up. End of Little Red Riding Hood, by Charles Perrault.
Snow White and Rose Red, from the Brothers Grimm Fairy Tales, by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There once was a poor widow who lived in a lonely cottage. In front of the cottage was a garden wherein stood 2 rose trees, one of which bore white and the other red roses. She had 2 children who were like the 2 rose trees, and one was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. They were as good and happy, as busy and cheerful as ever 2 children in the world were. Only Snow White was more quiet and gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red liked better to run about in the meadows and fields, seeking flowers and catching butterflies. But Snow White sat at home with her mother and helped her with her housework, or read to her when there was nothing to do. The 2 children were so fond of one another that they always held each other by the hand when they went out together. And when Snow White said, "We will not leave each other," Rose Red answered, "Never so long as we live." And their mother would add, "What one has, she must share with the other." They often ran about the forest alone and gathered red berries, and no beasts did them any harm, but came close to them trustfully. The little hare would eat a cabbage leaf out of their hands, the roe grazed by their side. The stag leapt merrily by them, and the birds sat still upon the boughs and sang whatever they knew. No mishap overtook them. If they had stayed too late in the forest and night came on, they laid themselves down near one another upon the moss and slept until morning came. And their mother knew this and did not worry on their account. Once they had spent the night in the wood, and the dawn had roused them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white dress sitting near their bed. He got up and looked quite kindly at them, but said nothing and went into the forest. And when they looked round, they found that they had been sleeping quite close to a precipice, and would have certainly fallen into it in the darkness if they had gone only a few paces further. And their mother told them that it must have been the angel who watches over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's little cottage so neat that it was a pleasure to look inside it. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house, and every morning laid a wreath of flowers by her mother's bed before she awoke, in which was a rose from each tree. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle on the hob. The kettle was of brass and shone like gold, so brightly was it polished. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, the mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." And then they sat round the hearth, and the mother took her spectacles and read aloud out of a large book, and the two girls listened as they sat and spun, and close by them lay a lamb upon the floor, and behind them, upon a perch, sat a white dove with its head hidden beneath its wings. One evening, as they were thus sitting comfortably together, someone knocked at the door as if he wished to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveler who is seeking shelter." Rose Red went and pushed back the bolt, thinking that it was a poor man, but it was not. It was a bear that stretched his broad black head within the door. Rose Red screamed and sprang back. The lamb bleated, the dove fluttered, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear began to speak and said, "Do not be afraid. I will do you no harm. I am half frozen and only want to warm myself a little beside you." "Poor bear," said the mother. "Lie down by the fire. Only take care that you do not burn your coat." Then she cried, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear will do you no harm. He means well." So they both came out, and by the lamb and dove came nearer, and were not afraid of him. The bear said, "Here, children, knock the snow out of my coat a little." So they brought the broom and swept the bear's hide clean, and he stretched himself by the fire and growled contentedly and comfortably. It was not long before they grew quite at home and played tricks with their clumsy guest. They tugged his hair with their hands, put their feet upon his back and rolled him about, or they took a hazel switch and beat him, and when he growled they laughed. But the bear took it all in good part. Only when they were too rough he called out, "Leave me alive, children." "Snow White, Rose Red, will you beat your wooer dead?" When it was bedtime and the others went to bed, the mother said to the bear, "You can lie there by the hearth, and then you will be safe from the cold and the bad weather." As soon as the day dawned, the two children let him out, and he trotted across the snow into the forest. Henceforth the bear came every evening at the same time, laid himself down by the hearth, and let the children amuse themselves with him as much as they liked, and they got so used to him that the doors were never fastened until their black friend had arrived. When spring had come, and all outside was green, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and cannot come back for the whole summer." "Where are you going then, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go into the forest and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In the winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they are obliged to stay below and cannot work their way through. But now, when the sun has thawed and warmed the earth, they break through it and come out to pry and steal. And what once gets into their hands and in their caves does not easily see daylight again." Snow White was quite sorry at his departure, and as she unbolted the door for him and the bear was hurrying out, he caught against the bolt and a piece of his hairy coat was torn off, and it seemed to Snow White as if she had seen gold shining through it. But she was not sure about it. The bear ran away quickly and was soon out of sight behind the trees. A short time afterwards, the mother sent her children into the forest to get firewood. There they found a big tree which lay felled on the ground, and close by the trunk something was jumping backwards and forwards in the grass, but they could not make out what it was. When they came nearer, they saw a dwarf with an old withered face and a snow-white beard a yard long. The end of the beard was caught in a crevice of the tree, and the little fellow was jumping about like a dog tied to a rope and did not know what to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes and cried, "Why do you stand there? Can you not come here and help me?" "What are you up to, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid prying goose," answered the dwarf. "I was going to split the tree to get a little wood for cooking. The little bit of food that we people get is immediately burned up with heavy logs. We do not swallow so much as you coarse, greedy folk. I had just driven the wedge safely in, and everything was going as I wished, but the cursed wedge was too smooth and suddenly sprang out, and the tree closed so quickly that I could not pull out my beautiful white beard. So now it is tight, and I cannot get away, and the silly, sleek, milk-faced things laugh. Ugh, how odious you are." The children tried very hard, but they could not pull the beard out. It was caught too fast. "I will run and fetch someone," said Rose Red. "You senseless goose," snarled the dwarf. "Why should you fetch someone? You are already too many for me. Can you not think of something better?" "Don't be impatient," said Snow White. "I will help you." And she pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he laid hold of a bag which lay amongst the roots of the tree, and which was full of gold, and lifted it up, grumbling to himself. "Uncouth people, to cut off a piece of my fine beard! Bad luck to you!" And then he swung the bag upon his back and went off without even once looking at the children. Some time afterwards, Snow White and Rose Red went to catch a dish of fish. As they came near the brook, they saw something like a large grasshopper jumping towards the water, as if it were going to leap in. They ran to it and found it was the dwarf. "Where are you going?" said Rose Red. "You surely don't want to go into the water." "I am not such a fool," cried the dwarf. "Don't you see that the accursed fish wants to pull me in?" The little man had been sitting there fishing, and unluckily the wind had tangled up his beard with the fishing line. A moment later, a big fish made a bite, and the feeble creature had not strength to pull it out. The fish kept the upper hand and pulled the dwarf towards him. He held on to all the reeds and rushes, but it was of little good, for he was forced to follow the movements of the fish and was in urgent danger of being dragged into the water. The girls came just in time. They held him fast and tried to free his beard from the line, but all in vain. Beard and line were entangled fast together. There was nothing to do but bring out the scissors and cut the beard, whereby a small part of it was lost. When the dwarf saw that, he screamed out, "Is that civil, you toadstool, to disfigure a man's face? Was it not enough to clip off the end of my beard? Now you have to cut off the best part of it? I cannot let myself be seen by my people. I wish you had been made to run the soles off your shoes." Then he took out a sack of pearls which he lay in the rushes, and without another word he dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. It happened that soon afterwards the mother sent the 2 children to the town to buy needles and thread and laces and ribbons. The road led them across a heath, upon which huge pieces of rock lay strewn about. There they noticed a large bird hovering in the air, flying slowly round and round above them. It sank lower and lower, and at last settled near a rock not far away. Immediately they heard a loud, piteous cry. They ran up and saw with horror that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the dwarf, and was going to carry him off. The children, full of pity, at once took tight hold of the little man, and pulled against the eagle so long that at last he let his booty go. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his first fright, he cried with his shrill voice, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You dragged at my brown coat so that it is all torn and full of holes, you clumsy creatures." Then he took up a sack full of precious stones and slipped away again under the rock into his hole. The girls, who by this time were used to his ingratitude, went on their way and did their business in town. As they crossed the heath again, on their way home, they surprised the dwarf, who had emptied out his bag of precious stones in a clean spot, and had not thought that anyone would come there so late. The evening sun shone upon the brilliant stones. They glittered and sparkled with all colors so beautifully that the children stood still and stared at them. "Why do you stand gaping there?" cried the dwarf, and his ashen gray face became copper red with rage. He was still cursing when a loud growling was heard, and a black bear came trotting towards them out of the forest. The dwarf sprang up in fright, but he could not reach his cave, for the bear was already close. Then in the dread of his heart he cried, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me! I will give you all my treasures. Look, the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life! What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Come, take these 2 wicked girls. They are tender morsels for you, fat as young quails. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear took no heed of his words, but gave the wicked creature a single blow with his paw, and he did not move again. The girls had run away, but the bear called to them, "Snow White and Rose Red, do not be afraid. Wait, I will come with you." Then they recognized his voice and waited, and when he came up to them, suddenly his bearskin fell off, and he stood there, a handsome man, clothed all in gold. "I am a king's son," he said, "and I was bewitched by that wicked dwarf who had stolen my treasures. I have had to run about the forest as a savage bear until I was freed by his death. Now he has got his well-deserved punishment." Snow White was married to him, and Rose Red to his brother, and they divided between them the great treasure which the dwarf had gathered together in his cave. The old mother lived peacefully and happily with her children for many years. She took the 2 rose trees with her, and they stood before her window, and every year bore the most beautiful roses, white and red. End of Snow White and Rose Red from the Brothers Grimm Fairy Tales by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm.
The Tailor of Gloucester by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. In the time of swords and periwigs and full-skirted coats with flowered lappets, when gentlemen wore ruffles and gold-laced waistcoats of paduasoy and taffeta, there lived a tailor in Gloucester. He sat in the window of a little shop in Westgate Street, cross-legged on a table from morning till dark. All day long, while the light lasted, he sewed and snippeted, piecing out his satin and pompadour and lutestring. Stuffs had very strange names and were very, very expensive in the days of the Tailor of Gloucester. But although he sewed fine silk for his neighbours, he himself was very, very poor, a little old man in spectacles, with a pinched face, old crooked fingers, and a suit of threadbare clothes. He cut his coats without waste, according to his embroidered cloth. There were very small ends and snippets that lay about on the table. 2 narrow breadths for naught, except waistcoats for mice, said the tailor. One bitter cold day near Christmas time, the tailor began to make a coat of cherry-coloured corded silk embroidered with pansies and roses, and a cream-coloured satin waistcoat trimmed with gauze and green worsted chenille for the Mayor of Gloucester. The tailor worked, and he talked to himself. He measured the silk, and turned it round and round, and trimmed it into shape with his shears. The table was all littered with cherry-coloured snippets. No breadth at all, and cut on the cross. It is no breadth at all. Tippets for mice, and ribbons for mobs, for mice, said the Tailor of Gloucester. When the snowflakes came down against the small-lidded window-panes and shut out the light, the tailor had done his day's work. All the silk and satin lay cut out upon the table. There were 12 pieces for the coat, and 4 pieces for the waistcoat, and there were pocket flaps and cuffs and buttons all in order. For the lining of the coat there was fine yellow taffeta, and for the buttonholes of the waistcoat there was cherry-coloured twist. And everything was ready to sew together in the morning, all measured and sufficient, except that there was wanting just one single skein of cherry-coloured twisted silk. The tailor came out of his shop at dark, for he did not sleep there at night. He fastened the window and locked the door and took away the key. No one lived there at night but little brown mice, and they run in and out without any keys. For behind the wooden wainscots of all the old houses in Gloucester there are little mouse staircases and secret trapdoors, and the mice run from house to house through those long narrow passages. They can run all over the town without going into the streets. But the tailor came out of his shop and shuffled home through the snow. He lived quite nearby in College Court, next to the doorway to College Green, and although it was not a big house, the tailor was so poor he only rented the kitchen. He lived alone with his cat. It was called Simpkin. Now, all day long, while the tailor was out at work, Simpkin kept house by himself, and he also was fond of the mice, though he gave them no satin for coats. "Meow," said the cat, when the tailor opened the door. "Meow." The tailor replied, "Simpkin, we shall make our fortune, but I am worn to a ravelling. Take this groat, which is our last fourpence, and Simpkin, take a china pipkin, buy a pennyworth of bread, a pennyworth of milk, and a pennyworth of sausages. And oh, Simpkin, with the last penny of our fourpence, buy me 1 pennyworth of cherry-coloured silk. But do not lose the last penny of the fourpence, Simpkin, or I am undone and worn to a thread paper, for I have no more twist." Then Simpkin again said "Meow," and took the groat and the pipkin and went out into the dark. The tailor was very tired and beginning to be ill. He sat down by the hearth and talked to himself about that wonderful coat. "I shall make my fortune to be cut bias. The Mayor of Gloucester is to be married on Christmas Day in the morning, and he hath ordered a coat and an embroidered waistcoat to be lined with yellow taffeta, and the taffeta sufficeth. There is no more left over in snippets than will serve to make tippets for mice." Then the tailor started, for suddenly, interrupting him, from the dresser at the other side of the kitchen came a number of little noises. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip. "Now, what can that be?" said the Tailor of Gloucester, jumping up from his chair. The dresser was covered with crockery and pipkins, willow-pattern plates and teacups and mugs. The tailor crossed the kitchen and stood quite still beside the dresser, listening and peering through his spectacles. Again, from under a teacup came those funny little noises. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip. "This is very peculiar," said the Tailor of Gloucester, and he lifted up the teacup, which was upside down. Out stepped a little live lady mouse and made a curtsy to the tailor. Then she hopped away down off the dresser and under the wainscot. The tailor sat down again by the fire, warming his poor cold hand, and mumbling to himself, "The waistcoat is cut out from peach-coloured satin, tambour stitch and rosebuds in beautiful floss silk. Was I wise to entrust my last fourpence to Simpkin? 21 buttonholes of cherry-coloured twist." But all at once from the dresser there came other little noises. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip. "This is passing extraordinary," said the Tailor of Gloucester, and turned over another teacup which was upside down. Out stepped a little gentleman mouse and made a bow to the tailor. And then from all over the dresser came a chorus of little tappings, all sounding together and answering one another like watch beetles in an old worm-eaten window shutter. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip. And out from under teacups and from under bowls and basins stepped other and more little mice, who hopped away down off the dresser and under the wainscot. The tailor sat down close over the fire, lamenting, 21 buttonholes of cherry-coloured silk, to be finished by noon of Saturday, and this is Tuesday evening. Was it right to let loose those mouse, undoubtedly the property of Simpkin? Alack, I am undone, for I have no more twist. The little mice came out again and listened to the tailor. They took note of the pattern of that wonderful coat. They whispered to one another about the taffeta lining and about little mouse tippets. And then, all at once, they all ran away together down the passage behind the wainscot, squeaking and calling to one another as they ran from house to house. And not one mouse was left in the tailor's kitchen when Simpkin came back with a pipkin of milk. Simpkin opened the door and bounced in with an angry meow, like a cat that is vexed, for he hated the snow, and there was snow in his ears and snow in his collar at the back of his neck. He put down the loaf and the sausages upon the dresser and sniffed. "Simpkin," said the tailor, Where is my twist?" But Simpkin set down the pipkin of milk upon the dresser and looked suspiciously at the teacups. He wanted a supper of little fat mouse. "Simpkin," said the tailor, "where is my twist?" But Simpkin hid a little parcel privately in the teapot, and spit and growled at the tailor, and if Simpkin had been able to talk, he would have asked, "Where is my mouse?" "Alack, I am undone," said the Tailor of Gloucester, and went sadly to bed. All that night long, Simpkin hunted and searched through the kitchen, peeping into cupboards and under the wainscot, and into the teapot where he had hidden that twist, but still he found never a mouse. Whenever the tailor muttered and talked in his sleep, Simpkin said, "Meow," and made strange, horrid noises as cats do at night. For the poor old tailor was very ill with a fever, tossing and turning in the four-post bed, and still in his dreams he mumbled, "No more twist, no more twist." All that day he was ill, and the next day, and the next, and what should become of the cherry-coloured coat? In the tailor's shop in Westgate Street, the embroidered silk and satin lay cut out upon the table, 21 buttonholes, and who should come to sew them, when the window was barred and the door was fast locked? But that does not hinder the little brown mice. They run in and out without any keys, through all the old houses in Gloucester. Out of doors the market folks went trudging through the snow to buy their geese and turkeys, and to bake their Christmas pies, but there would be no Christmas dinner for Simpkin and the poor old Tailor of Gloucester. The tailor lay ill for 3 days and nights, and then it was Christmas Eve and very late at night. The moon climbed up over the roofs and chimneys, and looked down over the gateway into College Court. There were no lights in the windows, nor any sound in the houses. All the city of Gloucester was fast asleep under the snow. And still Simpkin wanted his mice, and he mewed as he stood beside the four-post bed. But it is in the old story that all the beasts can talk in the night between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day in the morning, though there are very few folk that can hear them or know what it is that they say. When the cathedral clock struck 12, there was an answer like an echo of the chimes, and Simpkin heard it, and came out of the tailor's door, and wandered about in the snow. From all the roofs and gables and old wooden houses in Gloucester came 1,000 merry voices singing the old Christmas rhymes, all the old songs that I ever heard of, and some that I don't know, like Whittington's bells. First and loudest, the cocks cried out, "Dame, get up and bake your pies!" "Oh, dilly, dilly, dilly," sighed Simpkin. And now in the garret there were lights and sounds of dancing, and cats came from over the way. "Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, all the cats in Gloucester, except me," said Simpkin. Under the wooden eaves the starlings and sparrows sang of Christmas pies, the jackdaws woke up in the cathedral tower, and although it was the middle of the night, the throstles and robins sang. The air was quite full of little twittering tunes. But it was all rather provoking to poor hungry Simpkin. Particularly he was vexed with some little shrill voices from behind a wooden lattice. I think that they were bats, because they always have very small voices, especially in a black frost when they talk in their sleep, like the Tailor of Gloucester. They said something mysterious that sounded like, "Buzz," quoth the blue fly, "hum," quoth the bee. "Buzz and hum," they cry, and so do we. And Simpkin went away, shaking his ears as if he had a bee in his bonnet. From the tailor's shop in Westgate came a glow of light, and when Simpkin crept up to peep in at the window, it was full of candles. There was a snippeting of scissors and a snappeting of thread, and little mouse voices sang loudly and gaily. 24 tailors went to catch a snail. The best man among them durst not touch her tail. She put out her horns like a little callow cow. "Run, tailors, run, or she'll have you all eaten now." Then, without a pause, the little mouse voices went on again. "Sieve my lady's oatmeal, grind my lady's flour, put it in a chestnut, let it stand an hour." "Mew, mew," interrupted Simpkin, and he scratched at the door. but the key was under the tailor's pillow. He could not get in. The little mice only laughed and tried another tune. 3 little mice sat down to spin. Pussy passed by and she peeped in. What are you at, my fine little men? Making coats for gentlemen. Shall I come in and cut off your threads? Oh no, Miss Pussy, you'd bite off our heads. Mew, mew, cried Simpkin. Hey, diddle dinkety, answered the little mice. Hey, diddle dinkety, poppety hit. The merchants of London, they wear scarlet, silk in the collar and gold in the hem. So merrily march the merchantmen. They clicked their thimbles to mark the time, but none of the songs pleased Simpkin. He sniffed and mewed at the door of the shop. And then I bought a pipkin and a popkin, a slipkin and a slopkin, all for 1 farthing, and upon the kitchen dresser, added the rude little mice. Mew, scratch, scratch, scuffled Simpkin on the window-sill, while the little mice inside sprang to their feet and all began to shout at once in little twittering voices, No more twist! No more twist! And they barred up the window shutters and shut out Simpkin. But still through the nicks in the shutters he could hear the click of thimbles and little mouse voices singing, No more twist! No more twist! Simpkin came away from the shop and went home, considering in his mind. He found the poor old tailor without fever, sleeping peacefully. Then Simpkin went on tiptoe and took a little parcel of silk out of the teapot and looked at it in the moonlight, and he felt quite ashamed of his badness compared with those good little mice. When the tailor awoke in the morning, the first thing which he saw upon the patchwork quilt was a skein of cherry-coloured twisted silk, and beside his bed stood the repentant Simpkin. Alack, I am worn to a ravelling, said the Tailor of Gloucester, but I have my twist. The sun was shining on the snow when the tailor got up and dressed, and came out into the street with Simpkin running before him. The starlings whistled on the chimney stacks, and the throstles and robins sang, but they sang their own little noises, not the words they had sung in the night. Alack, said the tailor, I have my twist, but no more strength nor time than will serve to make me 1 single buttonhole, for this is Christmas Day in the morning. The Mayor of Gloucester shall be married by noon, and where is his cherry-coloured coat? He unlocked the door of the little shop in Westgate Street, and Simpkin ran in like a cat that expects something. But there was no one there, not even 1 little brown mouse. The boards were swept clean, the little ends of thread and the little silk snippets were all tidied away and gone from off the floor. But up on the table, oh joy, the tailor gave a shout. There, where he had left plain cuttings of silk, there lay the most beautifulest coat and embroidered satin waistcoat that ever was worn by a mayor of Gloucester. There were roses and pansies upon the facings of the coat, and the waistcoat was worked with poppies and cornflowers. Everything was finished except just 1 single cherry-coloured buttonhole, and where that buttonhole was wanting, there was pinned in a scrap of paper with these words in little teeny-weeny writing, No more twist. And from then began the luck of the Tailor of Gloucester. He grew quite stout and he grew quite rich. He made the most wonderful waistcoats for all the rich merchants of Gloucester and for all the fine gentlemen of the country round. Never were seen such ruffles or such embroidered cuffs and lappets, but his buttonholes were the greatest triumph of it all. The stitches of those buttonholes were so neat, I wonder how they could be stitched by an old man in spectacles, with crooked old fingers and a tailor's thimble. The stitches of those buttonholes were so small, they looked as if they had been made by little mice. End of The Tailor of Gloucester by Beatrix Potter. Read by Edenwillow.
The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net, and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost, and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement, and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed, "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea of which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out, and climbed upon a wheelbarrow, and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow, and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate, and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. End of The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Read by Carrie May Streb. The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep, so deep indeed that no cable could sound it, and many church steeples, piled one upon another, would not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. There dwell the Sea King and his subjects. We must not imagine that there is nothing at the bottom of the sea but bare yellow sand. No, indeed, for on this sand grow the strangest flowers and plants, the leaves and stems of which are so pliant that the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they had life. Fishes, both large and small, glide between the branches as birds fly among the trees here upon land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. Its walls are built of coral, and the long Gothic windows are of clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as the water flows over them. Their appearance is very beautiful, for in each lies a glittering pearl which would be fit for the diadem of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very sensible woman, but exceedingly proud of her high birth, and on that account wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others of high rank were only allowed to wear sits. She was, however, deserving of great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her 6 granddaughters. They were beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But, like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long they played in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in, just as the swallows fly into our houses when we open the windows. Only the fishes swam up to the princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. Outside the castle there was a beautiful garden, in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers, and blossoms like flames of fire. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was the finest sand, but blue as the flame of burning sulphur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if the blue sky were everywhere, above and below, instead of the dark depths of the sea. In the calm weather the sun could be seen, looking like a reddish-purple flower with light streaming from the calyx. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden, where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flower bed in the form of a whale. Another preferred to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid, while the youngest child made hers round, like the sun, and it grew flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, while her sisters showed delight at the wonderful things which they obtained from the wrecks of vessels. She cared only for her pretty flowers, red like the sun, and a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy, carved out of pure white stone, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. She planted by the statue a rose-colored weeping willow, It grew rapidly and soon hung its fresh branches over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The shadows had the color of violet and waved to and fro like the branches, so that it seemed as if the crown of the tree and the root were at play, trying to kiss each other. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, the people and the animals. To her it seemed most wonderful and beautiful to hear that the flowers of the land had fragrance, while those below the sea had none, that the trees of the forest were green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was a pleasure to listen to them. Her grandmother called these birds fishes, or the Little Mermaid would not have understood what was meant, for she had never seen birds. "When you have reached your 15th year," said the grandmother, "you will have permission to rise up out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships go sailing by. Then you will see both forests and towns." In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15, but as each was a year younger than the other, the youngest would have to wait 5 years before her turn came to rise up from the bottom of the ocean to see the earth as we do. However, each promised to tell the others what she saw on her first visit and what she thought was most beautiful. Their grandmother could not tell them enough. There were so many things about which they wanted to know. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest, she who had the longest time to wait and who was so quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window, looking up through the dark blue water and watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and the stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew that was either a whale swimming over her head or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. At length the eldest was 15 and was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean. When she returned, she had hundreds of things to talk about. But the finest thing, she said, was to lie on the sandbank in the quiet moonlit sea, near the shore, gazing at the lights of the nearby town that twinkled like hundreds of stars, and listening to the sounds of music, the noise of carriages, the voices of human beings, and the merry pealing of the bells in the church steeples. Because she could not go near all these wonderful things, she longed for them all the more. Oh, how eagerly did the youngest sister listen to all these descriptions, and afterwards, when she stood at the open window, looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city, with all its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of the church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and to swim about where she pleased. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold, and violet and rose-colored clouds, which she could not describe, drifted across it. And more swiftly than the clouds flew a large flock of wild swans toward the setting sun, like a long white veil across the sea. She also swam towards the sun, but it sank into the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds and from the sea. The third sister's turn followed, and she was the boldest of them all, for she swam up a broad river that emptied into the sea. On the bank she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines, and palaces and castles peeping out from amid the proud trees of the forest. She heard birds singing and felt the rays of sun so strongly that she was obliged often to dive under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek she found a large group of little human children, almost naked, sporting about in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in great fright. And then a little black animal, it was a dog, but she didn't know it, for she had never seen one before, came to the water and barked at her so furiously that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. But she said she would never forget the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty children who could swim in the water although they had no tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but said it was quite as beautiful there as near the land. She could see many miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such a great distance that they looked like seagulls. The dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils till it seemed as if it was 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what the others had not seen the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about, each like a pearl, she said, but larger and loftier than the churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest and let the wind play with her long hair. She noticed that all the ships sailed past very rapidly, steering as far away as they could, as if they were afraid of the iceberg. Towards evening, as the sun went down, dark clouds covered the sky. The thunder rolled, and the flashes of lightning glowed red on the icebergs as if they were tossed about the heaving sea. On all the ships the sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while she sat on the floating iceberg, calmly watching the lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. Each of the sisters, when she had permission to rise to the surface, was delighted with the new and beautiful sights. Now that they were grown-up girls and could go when they pleased, they had become quite indifferent about it. They soon wished themselves back again, and after a month had passed, they said it was much more beautiful down below and pleasanter to be at home. Yet often in the evening hours, the 5 sisters would twine their arms about each other and rise to the surface together. Their voices were more charming than that of any human being, and before the approach of the storm, when they feared that a ship might be lost, they swam before the vessel, singing enchanting songs of the delights to be found in the depths of the sea, and begging the voyagers not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song, and thought it was the sign of the storm. These things were never beautiful to them, for if the ship sank, the men were drowned, and their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose, arm in arm, through the water, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry. Only since mermaids have no tears, she suffered more acutely. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," said she, "I know that I shall love the world up there, and all the people who live in it." At last she reached her 15th year. "Well, now you are grown up," said the old dowager, her grandmother. "Come and let me adorn you like your sisters." And she placed in her hair a wreath of white lilies, of which every flower leaf was half a pearl. Then the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Yes, I know. Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside that heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better. But she could not change herself, so she said farewell and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set when she raised her head above the waves. The clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water. Only one sail was set, for not a breeze stirred, and the sailors sat idle on the deck or amidst the rigging. There was music and song on board, and as darkness came on, 100 colored lanterns were lighted, as if the flags of all nations waved in the air. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then, as the waves lifted her up, she could look through the glass window panes and see a number of gaily dressed people. Among them, the most beautiful of all was a young prince with large black eyes. He was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being celebrated with great display. The sailors were dancing on deck, and when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the air, making it as bright as day. The little mermaid was so startled that she dived underwater, and when she again stretched out her head, it looked as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurted fire about, splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, and even the smallest rope, could be distinctly seen. How handsome the young prince looked, as he pressed the hands of all his guests and smiled at them, while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns had been extinguished. No more rockets rose from the air, and the cannon had ceased firing, but the sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down on the water, so that she could look within. After a while, the sails were quickly set, and the ship went on her way. But soon the waves rose higher, heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more the sails were furled, and the great ship pursued her, flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountain high, as if they would overtop the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them, then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. To the little mermaid this was a pleasant sport, but not so to the sailors. At length the ship groaned and creaked. The thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea, as the waves broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed, and as the ship lay over on her side, the water rushed in. The little mermaid now perceived that the crew were in danger, even if she was obliged to be careful to avoid the beams and planks of the wreck which lay scattered on the water. At one moment it was pitch dark so that she could not see a single object, but when a flash of lightning came, it revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board except the prince. When the ship parted, she had seen him sink into the deep waves, and she was glad, for she thought he would now be with her. Then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water, so that when he got down to her father's palace, he would certainly be quite dead. No, he must not die. So she swam among the beams and planks which strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they would crush her to pieces. Diving deep under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, she at length managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power to swim in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him, his beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had not the little mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above the water and let the waves carry them where they would. In the morning the storm had ceased, but of the ship not a single fragment could be seen. The sun came up red and shining out of the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her little garden, so she kissed him again and wished he might live. Presently they came in sight of land, and she saw lofty blue mountains on which the white snow rested as if a flock of swans were lying upon them. Beautiful green forests were near the shore, and close by stood a large building, whether a church or a convent she could not tell. Orange and citron trees grew in the garden, and before the doors stood lofty palms. The sea here formed a little bay, in which the water lay quiet and still, but very deep. She swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered in fine white sand, and there she laid him in the warm sunshine. taking care to raise his head higher than his body. Then bells sounded in a large white building, and some young girls came into the garden. The little mermaid swam out farther from the shore and hid herself among some high rocks that rose out of the water. Covering her head and neck with the foam of the sea, she watched there to see what would become of the poor prince. It was not long before she saw a young girl approach the spot where the prince lay. She seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment. Then she brought a number of people, and the mermaid saw that the prince came to life again and smiled upon those who stood about him. But to her he sent no smile. He knew not that she had saved him. This made her very sorrowful, and when he was led away into the great building, she dived down into the water and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she could tell them nothing. Many an evening and morning did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen and watched them gathered. She watched the snow on the mountain tops melt away, but never did she see the prince, and therefore she always returned home more sorrowful than before. It was her only comfort to sit in her own little garden and fling her arm around the beautiful marble statue, which was like the prince. She gave up tending her flowers, and they grew in wild confusion over the paths, twining their long leaves and stems around the branches of the trees so that the whole place became dark and gloomy. At length she could bear it no longer and told one of her sisters all about it. Then the others heard the secret, and very soon it became known to several mermaids, one who had an intimate friend who happened to know about the prince. She had also seen the festival on board ship, and she told them where the prince came from and where his palace stood. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. Then they entwined their arms and rose together to the surface of the water, near the spot where they knew the prince's palace stood. It was built of bright yellow, shining stone, and had long flights of marble steps, one of which reached quite down to the sea. Splendid gilded cupolas rose over the roof, and between the pillars that surrounded the whole building stood lifelike statues of marble. Through the clear crystal of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms, with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry and walls covered with beautiful paintings. In the center of the largest salon, a fountain threw its sparkling jets high up into the glass cupola of the ceiling, through which the sun shone in upon the water and upon the beautiful plants that grew in the basin of the fountain. Now that the little mermaid knew where the prince lived, she spent many an evening and many a night on the water near the palace. She would swim much nearer the shore than any of the others had ventured, and once she went up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which threw a broad shadow on the water. Here she sat and watched the young prince, who thought himself alone in the bright moonlight. She often saw him evenings sailing in a beautiful boat on which music sounded and flags waved. She peeped out from among the green rushes, and if the wind caught her silvery white veil, those who saw it believed it to be a swan spreading out its wings. When the fishermen set their nets by the light of their torches, she heard them relate many good things about the young prince, and this made her glad that she had saved his life when he was tossed about half dead on the waves. She remembered how his head had rested on her bosom, and how heartily she had kissed him, but he knew nothing of all of this, and could not even dream of her. She grew more and more to like human beings, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those whose worlds seemed to be so much larger than her own. They could fly over the sea in ships and mount the high hills which were far above the clouds, and the lands they possessed, their woods and their fields stretched far away beyond the reach of her sight. There was so much that she wished to know, but her sisters were unable to answer all her questions. She then went to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world, which she rightly called the lands above the sea. "If human beings are not drowned," asked the little mermaid, "can they live forever?" Do they never die, as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady, they must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live for 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we become only foam on the surface of the water, and have not even a grave among those we love. We have not immortal souls. We shall never live again, like the green seaweed when once it has been cut off. We can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have souls which live forever. Even after the body has been turned to dust, they rise up through the clear, pure air, beyond the glittering stars, as we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth. So do they rise to the unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see. Why have not we immortal souls? Asked the little mermaid mournfully. I would gladly give all the hundreds of years that I have to live to be a human being only for one day, and to have the hope of knowing that happiness of that glorious world above the stars. You must not think that, said the old woman. We believe that we are much happier and much better off than human beings. So I shall die, said the little mermaid. And as the foam of the sea I shall be driven out, never again to hear the music of the waves or to see the pretty flowers or the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man should love you so much that you are more to him than his father or his mother. And if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain and share in the future happiness of mankind. He would give to you a soul and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which among us is considered so beautiful, on earth is thought to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it is necessary, in order to be handsome, to have 2 stout props, which they call legs. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. Let us be happy, said the old lady, and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening we are going to have a court ball. It was one of those splendid sights which we can never see on earth. The walls and the ceiling of the large ballroom were made of thick but transparent crystal. Many hundreds of colossal shells, some of deep red, others of grass green with blue fire in them, stood in rows on each side. These lighted up the whole salon, and shone through the walls so that the sea was also illuminated. Innumerable fishes, great and small, swam past the crystal walls. On some of them the scales glowed with a purple brilliance, and on others shone like silver and gold. Through the halls flowed a broad stream, and in it danced the mermen and the mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. No one on earth had such lovely voices as they, but the little mermaid sang more sweetly than all. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails, and for a moment her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she was the sweetest voice either on earth or in the sea. But soon she thought again of the world above her. She could not forget the charming prince, nor her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. She crept away silently out of her father's palace, and while everything within the gladness and sun, she sat down in her own little garden, sorrowful and alone. Then she heard the bugle sounding through the water and thought, he is certainly sailing above, he in whom my wishes center, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him, and to win an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been so much afraid. She can give me counsel and help. Then the little mermaid went out from her garden and took the road to the foaming whirlpools, behind which the sorceress lived. She had never been that way before. Neither flowers nor grass grew there. Nothing but bare, gray, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where the water, like foaming mill wheels, seized everything that came within its reach and cast it into the fathomless deep. Through the midst of these crushing whirlpools, the little mermaid was obliged to pass before she could reach the dominions of the sea witch. Then, for a long distance, the road lay across the stretch of warm, bubbling mire, called by the witch her turf moor. Beyond this was the witch's house, which stood in the center of a strange forest, where all the trees and flowers were polypi, half animals and half plants. They looked like serpents with 100 heads, growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms, with fingers like flexible worms, moving limb after limb from the root to the top. All that could be reached in the sea they seized upon and held fast, so that it never escaped from their clutches. The little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still and her heart beat with fear. She came very near turning back. But she thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. She fastened her long flowing hair round her head, so that the polypi should not lay hold of it. She crossed her hands on her bosom, and then darted forward as the fish shoots through the water, between the supple arms and fingers of the ugly polypi, which were stretched out on each side of her. She saw that they all held in their grasp something they had seized with their numerous little arms, which were as strong as iron bands. Tightly grasped in their clinging arms were white skeletons of human beings who had perished at sea and had sunk down into the deep waters, skeletons of land animals, and oars, rudders, and chests of ships. There was even a little mermaid whom they had caught and strangled, and this seemed the most shocking of all to the little princess. She now came to a place of marshy ground in the wood, where large fat water snakes were rolling in the mire and showing their ugly, drab-colored bodies. In the midst of this spot stood a house built of the bones of shipwrecked human beings. There sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with pieces of sugar. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens, and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, though it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, and have 2 supports instead, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and so that you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there wiggling. "You are but just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draught for you, with which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise. Seat yourself there and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink up into what men call legs. You will feel great pain, as if a sword were passing through you, but all who see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. Every step you take, however, will be as if you're treading upon sharp knives, and as if the blood must flow. If you will bear all this, I will help you." "Yes, I will," said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the mortal soul. "Think again," said the witch, "for once your shape has become like a human being, you can no longer be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sister's or to your father's place again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget his father and mother for your sake, and to love you with his whole soul, and allow the priest to join your hands that you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first thing after he marries another, your heart will break and you will become foam on the crest of the waves." "I will do it," said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. "But I must be paid also," said the witch, "and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it, but this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have as the price of my costly draught, which must be mixed with my own blood so that it may be as sharp as a 2-edged sword. "But if you take away my voice," said the little mermaid, "what is left for me? Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes, surely with these you can enchain a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue, that I may cut it off as my payment, then you shall have the powerful draught." "It shall be," said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic draught. "Cleanliness is a good thing," said she, scouring the vessel with snakes, which she had tied together in a large knot. Then she pricked herself in the breast and let the black blood drop into the cauldron. The steam that rose twisted itself into such horrible shapes that no one could look at them without fear. Every moment the witch threw a new ingredient into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. "There it is for you," said the witch. Then she cut off the mermaid's tongue, so that she would never again speak or sing. "If the polypi should seize you as you return through the wood," said the witch, "throw over them a few drops of the potion, and their fingers will be torn into 1,000 pieces." But the little mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the polypi sprang back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering draught, which shone in her hand like a twinkling star. So she passed quickly through the wood and the marsh, and between the rushing whirlpools. She saw that in her father's palace the torches in the ballroom were extinguished, and that all within were asleep. But she did not venture to go in to them, for now that she was dumb and going to leave them forever, she felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the garden, took a flower from the flower bed of each of her sisters, kissed her hand towards the palace 1,000 times, and then rose up through the dark blue waters. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace and approached the beautiful marble steps. But the moon shone clear and bright. Then the little mermaid drank the magic draught, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun rose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain. But before her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had as pretty a pair of white legs and tiny feet as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long thick hair. The prince asked her who she was and whence she came. She looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with her deep blue eyes, but could not speak. He took her by the hand and led her to the palace. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if she were treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives. She bore it willingly, however, and moved at the prince's side as lightly as a bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful, swaying movements. She was very soon arrayed in a costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace, but she was dumb, and could neither speak nor sing. Beautiful female slaves, dressed in silk and gold, stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. This was a great sorrow to the little mermaid, for she knew how much more sweetly she herself once could sing, and she thought, "Oh, if he could only know that I have given away my voice forever to be with him." The slaves next performed some pretty fairy-like dances, to the sound of beautiful music. Then the little mermaid raised her lovely white arms, stood on the tips of her toes, glided over the floor, and danced as no one yet had been able to dance. At each moment her beauty was more revealed, and her expressive eyes appealed more directly to the heart than the songs of the slaves. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling. She danced again quite readily, to please him, though each time her foot touched the floor, it seemed as if she trod on sharp knives. The prince said she should remain with him always, and she was given permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her, that she might accompany him on horseback, They rode together through the sweet-scented woods where the green boughs touched their shoulders and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with him to the tops of the high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only smiled and followed him till they could see the clouds beneath them like a flock of birds flying to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold sea water. It was then that she thought of all those below in the deep. Once during the night her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how she had grieved them. After that they came to the same place every night. Once she saw in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father, with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but did not venture so near the land as the sisters had. As the days passed, she loved the prince more dearly, and he loved her as one would love a little child. The thought never came to him to make her his wife, yet unless he married her, she could not receive an immortal soul, and on the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. "Do you not love me the best of them all?" the eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say when he took her in his arms and kissed her fair forehead. "Yes, you are dear to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but whom I shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple where several young maidens performed the service. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I could love. But you are like her, and you have almost driven her image from my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and good fortune has sent you to me in her stead. We will never part." "Ah, he knows not that it was I who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I carried him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and watched till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maiden that he loves better than he loves me." The mermaid sighed deeply, but she could not weep. "He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple, therefore she will never return to the world. They will meet no more. I am by his side and see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and give up my life for his sake." Very soon it was said that the prince was to marry, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife. For a fine ship was being fitted out. Although the prince gave out that he intended merely to pay a visit to the king, it was generally supposed that he went to court the princess. A great company were to go with him. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. "I must travel," he said to her. "I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her because she is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would choose you, my dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes." Then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long waving hair, and laid his head on her heart, while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. "You are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child, are you?" he said, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship, which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. Then he told her of the storm and of calm, of strange fishes in the deep beneath them, and of what the divers had seen there. She smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. In the moonlit night, when all on board were asleep except the man at the helm, she sat on the deck, gazing down through the clear water. She thought she could distinguish her father's castle, and upon it her aged grandmother, with the silver crown on her head, looking through the rushing tide at the keel of the vessel. Then her sisters came up on the waves and gazed at her mournfully, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them and smiled, and wanted to tell them how happy and well off she was. But the cabin boy approached, and when her sisters dived down, he thought what he saw was only the foam of the sea. The next morning the ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king, whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets. Soldiers with flying colors and glittering bayonets lined the roads through which they passed. Every day was a festival, balls and entertainments following one another, but the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she had been brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came, then the little mermaid, who was anxious to see whether she was really beautiful, was obliged to admit that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long, dark eyelashes her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. "It was you," said the prince, "who saved my life when I lay as if dead on the beach," and he folded his blushing bride in his arms. "Oh, I am too happy," said he to the little mermaid. "My fondest hopes are now fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere." The little mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. All the church bells rang, and the heralds rode through the town proclaiming the betrothal. Perfumed oil was burned in costly silver lamps on every altar. The priests waved the censers, while the bride and the bridegroom joined their hands and received the blessing of the bishop. The little mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, held up the bride's train. But her ears heard nothing of the festive music, and her eyes saw not the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death which was coming to her, and of all she had lost in the world. On the same evening the bride and the bridegroom went on board the ship. Cannons were roaring, flags waving, and in the center of the ship a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant sleeping couches for the bridal pair during the night. The ship, under a favorable wind with swelling sails, glided away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of colored lamps were lighted, and the sailors danced merrily on the deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of her first rising out of the sea, when she had seen similar joyful festivities, so she too joined in the dance, poised herself in the air as a swallow when he pursues his prey, and all present cheered her wonderingly. She had never danced so gracefully before. Her tender feet felt as if cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for the pain, as sharper pain had pierced her heart. She knew this was the last evening she would ever see the prince for whom she had forsaken her kindred and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him, or gaze on the starry sky and the deep sea. An eternal night, without a thought or a dream, awaited her. She had no soul, and now could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on the ship until long after midnight. She smiled and danced with the rest, while the thought of death was in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride, and she played with his raven hair, till they went arm in arm to rest in the sumptuous tent. Then all became still on board the ship, and only the pilot, who stood at the helm, was awake. The little mermaid leaned her white arms on the edge of the vessel and looked towards the east for the first blush of morning, for that first ray of the dawn which was to be her death. She saw her sisters rising out of the flood. They were as pale as she, but their beautiful hair no longer waved in the wind. It had been cut off. "We had given our hair to the witch," said they, "to obtain help for you, that you may not die tonight. She has given us a knife, see, it is very sharp. Before the sun rises you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again into a fish's tail, and you will once more be a mermaid and can return to us to live out your 300 years before you are changed into the salt sea foam. Haste then, either he or you must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother mourns so for you that her white hair is falling. as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hasten. Do you not see the first red streaks in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and you must die. Then they sighed deeply and mournfully, and sank beneath the waves. The little mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent, and beheld the fair bride, whose head was resting on the prince's breast. She bent down and kissed his noble brow, then looked at the sky, on which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. She glanced at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid, but she flung it far from her into the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. She cast one more lingering, half-fainting glance at the prince, then threw herself from the ship into the sea and felt her body dissolving into foam. The sun rose above the waves, and his warm rays fell on the cold foam of the little mermaid, who did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright sun, and hundreds of transparent, beautiful creatures floating around her. She could see through them with white sails of the ships and the red clouds in the sky. Their speech was melodious, but could not be heard by mortal ears, just as their bodies could not be seen by mortal eyes. The little mermaid perceived that she had a body like theirs, and that she continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" asked she, and her voice sounded ethereal, like the voices of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. "Among the daughters of the air," answered one of them. "A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the will of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can, by their good deeds, procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool the sultry air that destroys mankind with the pestilence. We carry the perfume of the flowers to spread health and restoration. After we have striven for 300 years to do all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part in the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered and endured, and raised yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds, and now, by striving for 300 years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul." The little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes toward the sun and, for the first time, felt them filling with tears. On the ship in which she had left, the prince there were life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of the bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud that floated above. "After 300 years, thus shall we float into the kingdom of heaven," said she. "And we may even get there sooner," whispered one of her companions. "Unseen, we can enter the houses of men where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child that is joy of his parents and deserves their love, our time in probation is shortened. The child does not know when we fly through the room that we smile with joy at his good conduct. For we can count 1 year less of our 300 years, but when we see a naughty or wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow, and for every tear a day is added to our time of trial." End of The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Carrie Mae Streb.
Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat who had lived through the 2 seasons had lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them, and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with government. Between them all, poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys, or would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the Skin Horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked. "Or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real," said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the Skin Horse might be sensitive. But the Skin Horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, You can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your bunny. He'll do to sleep with you," and she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent and his talks with the skin horse. Very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together, in whispers, when Nan had gone away to her supper and left the night light burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail becoming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with a candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hand. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy, he's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy. He knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer, he was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes they had long ago lost their polish. There came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cosy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet padded softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see what side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back. All the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Ho," said the furry rabbit, "it's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one pieces, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs, and he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to twirl round and dance, till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ears, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was the sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," said the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken, and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned grey, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed and he talked in his sleep. And his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies, and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side, and one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright sunny morning and the window stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all. The little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. Hurrah, thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside. For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about his old bunny?" she asked. "That?" said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom. He had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it. For tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes, growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy hut in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood, when he lay in the bracken, and the little ants ran over his paws. The wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real, if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the colour of emeralds, and in the centre of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair. And her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose, that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. And now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in his arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I have brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbit Land, for he's going to live with you for ever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs and didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose. And before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it, and he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy, velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did. And he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through, and about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. End of The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams, read by LotusSeven.
The Wooden Horse by Mrs. W.K. Clifford. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Arnav Darnal. The Wooden Horse by Mrs. W.K. Clifford. Come and have a ride, the big brother said. I'm afraid, the little one answered. The horse's mouth is wide open. But it's only wooden. That is the best of a horse that isn't real. If his mouth is ever so wide open, he cannot shut it. So come. And the big brother lifted the little one up and dragged him about. Ah, do stop, the little one cried out in terror. Does the horse make that noise along the floor? Yes. And is it a real noise? Of course it is, the big brother answered. But I thought only real things could make real things, the little one said. Where does the imitation horse end and the real sound begin? At this, the big brother stood still for a few minutes. I was thinking about real and imitation things, he said presently. It's very difficult to tell which is which sometimes. You see, they get so close together that the one often grows into the other, and some imitated things become real, and some real ones become imitation as they go on. But I should say that you're a real coward for not having a ride. No, I'm not, the little one laughed, and getting astride the wooden horse, he sat up bravely. Oh, Jack, dear, he said to his brother, we will always be glad that we are real boys, or we too might have been made with mouths we were never able to shut. End of The Wooden Horse by Mrs. W.K. Clifford.